stuff. So
yeah,
he feels he has to pay them back as well. So when they sleep, he runs. But so we're nearly there, nearly finished.
Good, excellent.
You've got any more quotes, Simon, for your extension?
Chairman, I think we're just about to start.
Okay.
We'll shut off. We'll shut off.
I like Julian's armoury behind him.
I usually say I keep the Conservatives away with that, Simon.
Chairman, I think we are just about to start, Chairman.
Sorry, hold on one moment. I'll just confirm whether we're live. Sorry, I was on the phone to IS.
Can I just before we start, can I just make sure that people have got a clouded background behind them so that you aren't able to see what actually is behind you? I think probably would be really helpful. Councillor Rogerson, sorry to jump in, but I just know that that's been our process in other meetings.
Okay, and we are live, I can confirm.
Could I ask Meredith your suggestion about blurring the background? I've looked on the settings, I can't find anywhere to blur it.
Chairman, I think the producer today will be able to send Councillor Rand some notes on that to help him to do that.
Thank you. And that is that's Ian Buckingham. Yes. So thank you to Ian for any support you're able to give. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. If you could all turn your cameras off then, please, and mute your mics. That will help, I'm sure, with the bandwidth and the problems that people are having this morning with technical issues. Good morning. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before consideration of today's business, I will outline the protocols for the meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed to the public via Microsoft Teams and is also being recorded. May I remind members and officers to introduce yourselves each time you speak and turn your video and microphone off when you have finished speaking. If the Council's live stream fails during the meeting and we cannot share the proceedings, I will adjourn the meeting so that access can be restored. If the issue cannot be resolved, I will halt the meeting and the remaining business will be concluded at a future date. If a member experiences a technical issue, I will adjourn for a short period to try to re-establish their connection. Members wishing to speak or ask a question should indicate by typing X in the chat box. As I call members to speak, I will remind you to switch on your microphone. If for some reason you cannot be heard, the Democratic and Governance Officer will advise you. Votes will be taken using a roll call procedure. The Democratic and Governance Officer will read out the recommendation and the name of the proposer and seconder, and will then call each committee member's name in turn. You should confirm your name and advise whether you vote in favour or against the recommendation, or whether you wish to abstain from the vote. The Democratic and Governance Officer will then count the votes and advise the result accordingly. Where a member has a declared non-registrable interest, a disclosable pecuniary interest, or an interest by virtue of any trade union membership in a matter, they must leave the virtual meeting. Their departure will be confirmed and they will be invited to rejoin the meeting at the appropriate time. I plan to have a 10 to 15 minute break after the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman report, which we expect to be at around midday, although I may review this as the meeting progresses. And before we start today's business, I will ask Debbie Bolton, the Democratic and Governance Officer, to confirm committee members, co-opted members, participating observers and officers' attendance. Over to you, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll now call each member of the committee by name. If you could confirm your name and your electoral division, please. Councillor Atherfold.
Good morning, Councillor Atherfold, Cambourne, Treslothen.
Thank you. Councillor Burden.
Neil Burden, Stoke-Clemson Division.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Simon Elliott, Ludgvan Division.
Thank you. Councillor Formosa.
Good morning, Mark Formosa, Easy Careers.
Thank you. Councillor Frank.
Good morning, one and all. Hilary Frank representing the good folk of Saltash South.
Thank you. Councillor Gammon.
Debbie, she has asked for the helpline number, so perhaps she's not got contact at the moment.
Thank you. We'll come back to Councillor Gammon. Councillor Harvey.
Adrian Harvey, Newland East and Glenavern.
Thank you. Councillor Kirk.
Kirk, Gunny's Lake, Calstock.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
Good morning, everyone. It's Councillor Gemma Massey representing Launceston Central Division.
Thank you. Councillor Mustoe.
James Mustoe representing Mevagizzy.
Thank you. Councillor Rand.
Councillor Julian Rand representing St Kevin and Maneague on the beautiful Lizard. Winds
Thank you.
rainy.
Councillor Rogerson.
Good morning, Pat Rogerson, Bodmin, St Leonard.
Thank you. Councillor Sumby.
Good morning, Councillor David Saundy representing Falmouth, Truscabase.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders.
Good morning, Councillor Sally-Ann Saunders representing Bugle, and I'm substituting for Councillor Lennox Boyd this morning.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Mike Thomas representing Elston North.
Thank you. Councillor Gammon, I don't know if your technical issues have been resolved. I can also confirm that Councillor Sally Hawkin, the portfolio holder for Children, Wellbeing and Public Health, is on the call this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
For the live stream, I can also confirm the officers present today are Meredith Teasdale, Strategic Director for Together for Families, Ben Davis, Service Director, Children and Family Services, Kate Evan Hughes, Service Director, Education, Lisa Harvey, Service Director, Children's Health and Wellbeing, Gareth Rees, Strategic Finance Manager for Together for Families, Sharon Hinley, Head of Education, Access and Sufficiency, Julia Lemazurier, Head of Special Educational Needs and Disability, Alison Waters, Head of Service, Children and Families, West Cornwall, Matt Sharp, Public Health Practitioner, Debbie Bolton, Democratic and Governance Officer, Tracy Clark, Democratic and Governance Officer, who's producing today's meeting, and Ian Buckingham, who is our live stream operator today. If I could just go back to Councillor Gammon. I can see that her IT issues have been reported, Chairman, and she will join us as soon as she possibly can.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for that, Tracy. Thank you, Debbie. OK, so we move to the agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Saunders has said, she is substituting today for Councillor Lennox Boyd, and we have also had apologies from our 2 co-opted members, William Elliott and our Diocesan Board member Katie Fitzsimmons, who's unable to join us today, and we have no participating observers during today's meeting.
Thank you, Debbie. Neil, has Councillor Burton, you've put
just a quickie. I'm chairing another meeting at 2 o'clock if you go on that long. Thank you.
OK, thank you for that. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any, please? I'm just checking that that's a comment and not somebody saying yes. OK. So Jackie, Councillor Gammon is saying she's had to leave to sort out her IT with the help desks. So she'll return when that's possible. So there are no declarations of interest. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on January the 13th. And that's pages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and again a vast amount, so congratulations and thank you to Debbie for such expert minute taking. And anyone need to raise anything as a result of those? Okay, I can't see any crosses. I can't see any hands up. Okay, thank you. So could I have a proposer, please, for them to be accepted?
Happy to propose.
Thank you. Was that Mike?
Thank you.
Was it? Oh, sorry, I didn't catch.
And Mike Thomas.
Lovely, thank you. Was that a proposal?
Yes, the second.
Thanks. Did you get both of those, Debbie?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So over to you then for the roll call.
Thank you. It's been proposed by Councillor Elliott and seconded by Councillor Mike Thomas. And the recommendation is that the minutes of the meeting of the Children and Families Committee Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 13th of January 2021 were correctly recorded and that they be signed by the chairman. I'll go for, as we always do, a roll call for the vote. If the members could state whether they wish to vote in favour, against or abstain. Councillor Atherfold.
For.
Councillor Burden.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
For.
Councillor Gammon. Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Massey.
For.
Councillor Mustoe.
For.
Councillor Rand.
For.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Sawnby.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Thomas.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. The minutes have been approved.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Debbie. So we can now move on to item 4. Are there any public questions, please?
No, Chairman.
Right, thank you very much. So agenda item 5, not something we see on the agenda very often. A chance for me to say a few words. It is, of course, our last formal meeting of the committee, and I'm hugely sad to be saying that. It's been a privilege to chair this committee. I've enjoyed working with all of you, both past and present members. It's not been politicised ever, and I think that's not true of every committee on the council. I'm enormously proud of the work that we have done as a committee for children and families in Cornwall. And I know that you will have seen Councillor Hawking, the lead member's report, and she's listed the excellent work that we've done, and it's an amazing credit to this committee. But I just wanted to pick out perhaps what have been the outstanding ones, and of course that is in using the word outstanding, it's our Ofsted. I mean, it is on our watch that we have managed to come over 12 years I've been a councillor, and we were in special measures when I was first elected. So to be sitting here today, knowing that we have an outstanding Ofsted grading is absolutely fantastic. Not just for us as a council, but it means that we are doing a better job for children in the Duchy. So thank you for all the work that you've done as a committee to that. And of course, to the officers and their teams, particularly in the difficulties of the current pandemic. I feel that the 4 years that we've been working together have been a bit like the Michelle Obama book called Becoming. For a lot of that, we were becoming together for families. And there was a lot of work and a lot of commitment to that integration agenda. It was a good 18 months to 2 years work, and I'm proud to see how well it's actually functioning now. It's been a huge task to integrate public health nursing under Lisa's direction, and that's been again a very successful initiative, so thank you for all the work that's been done on that. And of course, a huge success is the work that the teams have done, the teams of officers in protecting and tracking vulnerable families throughout this pandemic. The statistics, the thousands of children that were actually tracked in terms of their vulnerability and in terms of their safety and for support is an absolute credit to officers. And I guess it can't go without mentioning another successful and is the transition in the senior leadership team. Losing all 4 senior members of staff could have been a disaster, and it's been anything but. From my perspective, and I'm certain it will be for many members of the committee, it's been a really smooth transition. So I want to thank Meredith and Kate and Lisa and Ben for the work that they've done, and also Gareth. Gareth has by far the harder job because he's the one who has to deal with me with figures and not words. So thank you to all of you for the work that you've done. And your teams. I know that in the last meeting we were able to formally thank them and have it minuted, but I just want to say again what a fantastic job the teams in Together for Families are doing and will continue to do. And that whatever happens in the next administration, that will be a solid base for any committee to refer to. So thank you for that. I'm really proud to have worked with you. I want to thank also Sally as the lead member for her support, and I think it would be true to say that she has probably had one of the hardest jobs of any councillor on this committee, to actually have the brief that she's had with not only children and families and their safety and their security, but to actually have to work with public health as well during a pandemic of this extent has been amazing. So it's a credit to Sally, the work that she's done and the way she's continued to support us throughout that. Thank you to my 2 vice chairs, both to Julian and to Simon, who've been a pleasure to work with and again have always supported me and been there to help in the chairing of this committee, and of course in all the work that goes on in the background as well, and the other committees that we sit on as a result of being chair and vice chair. So thank you to both of you. And the people behind the scenes, like today, Tracy and Ian, thank you. I'm not a technical person, so the fact that having to move to a virtual meeting has been, it's great to have the technical support that's there, so thank you very much for that. And finally, she said, holding back tears, I want to thank Debbie. She has been my rock. And her efficiency, her constitutional knowledge, her professionalism, her good humour, and her guidance at all times has made my job what it is. And also her memory prompts, because she knows I'm terrible with both names and faces, and she's always there, very often texting me, it's so and so, this is the name of that person and whatever. So thank you, Debbie, and thank you for being such a good friend. It's been a pleasure to work with you. So to all of you, officers and members, thank you for all your hard work and your commitment to the children and the families of Cornwall. Thank you, and thank you for allowing me that time to be able to say that. Thank you. So we can move on to item 6, which is special educational needs, statutory processes and future priorities. And that's on pages 10 to 15. And I believe, is Julie going to present, or Kate, you present? Yeah, it's Julie. Over to you then. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, everybody. So good morning, I'm Julie Lemazure and I'm Head of Special Educational Needs and/or Disability. It's a pleasure to engage with the committee members again in relation to special educational needs, and information has been particularly requested on this occasion in relation to education, health and care needs assessments. and the education, health and care plans. I provided an outline of the processes, the population, the performance, and I'm happy to answer questions and provide more details as required afterwards, because certainly this is an aspect of our statutory duties where there's many different dimensions which could be explored. So I can only sort of touch on an outline, but very happy to provide more details subsequently. So if members would like to refer to the paper, at 2.2 I've set out our population. You'll see that 15.2% of children and young people in Cornwall are identified as having a special educational need. And within that 15.2%, 2.6% of them have an education, health and care plan. This represents a higher level of special educational need. And 2.3 and 2.4, I have set out the processes, which are all in legislation and regulations for this aspect of our responsibilities. And I realised I'd given you a January snapshot in the report, but actually I'd let you know that we have a further January snapshot of our assessments that we concluded in this year in January. 100% met that 20-week target. So that's, that happens, it's not always, it wouldn't be good if it was always 100%, because that would imply that there was sometimes we weren't responding to challenges or detail, or it would, maybe the product wasn't good enough. But it was lovely to see the January figure, so I just wanted to mention that. And then I have, it goes on to the report to talk about how health and care fit into the education, health and care assessments and plans. This is a key topic. It's a key topic for families, for the different agencies. Since the 2014 legislation came into effect that established education, health and care assessments and plans, it has been ongoing for the last 7 years, and I believe it will be subject to the National SEND review, which is being undertaken, which is due to publish green papers later in this year, about how the system is working between education, health and care. Because primarily, as the things were established in 2014, this whole process is about education with health and care involvement and contribution as appropriate. But most of our children in Cornwall who have an education, health and care plan, it's only about education, because their needs are met through universal health services and through the general care of their families and their communities. So that you might be there might be questions about that one, and if you do have questions about that, it's absolutely fine. But I'll let you know that's quite a hot topic nationally and locally. So where do these children and young people receive their education? If they have an education, health and care plan, and this is where I think it might be particularly interesting, because this is where Cornwall is a little bit different. Our population figures, as you've seen, aren't out of line. The types of needs we have are identified, aren't out of line with our statistical neighbours or the region. But what you can see here is we've got a different pattern in our provision. So in Cornwall, we have a very low use of special schools. That's when you combine the independent sector and our own special schools in the county. So what's my view on that? I think that is a very positive thing. The outcomes for our children and young people with education, health and care plans are much higher. We were high. That's one of the aspects of our performance which is very high. So it appears to be working well for the children and young people. It's also, in the context of being a very poorly funded local authority, much more cost effective. It enables, it means that the children and young people, if they're not in a special school, or where are they? Well, you'll see most of them are in mainstream schools, or they are in resource spaces, which are part of mainstream schools. So resource spaces, indeed, this is where our provision is quite different. They're a key part of the arrangements in Cornwall. They definitely support mainstream and community engagement, and they do reduce travel and our footprint, our carbon footprint. We have double the use of other Southwest authorities of this type of provision, and when we discuss this with the Department for Education, they see this as a very positive response to mainstream access, but also to our geographical spread. So we have a good spread of provision really, but it's of course got as far as 2.8 in the paper. It's a duty of the council to maintain an overview of the available special educational needs provision and then make appropriate developments. So at this point in the brief paper, there's reference to some new bricks and mortar, which is very positive, that we have a national capital grant which is supporting some small projects, and that we have the development of the new special school in Bodmin that I believe the committee is aware of. But what is so important, what's really is key, is the ongoing enhancement of skills and approach to SEN in our mainstream early years settings, our mainstream schools and our further education providers, because as I've noted earlier, that's where most of the young people with these needs do access their education. And it is where most of our attention is focused. It's always nice to have a nice shiny building, isn't it, and something in the press, but it's actually about the quality of what is happening in individual classrooms and social activities for children and young people. So our performance is strong. However,
looks, Councillor Rogerson, like Julie has frozen. I mean, I think that you've got the gist of the report, and I think both Kate and I would be happy to take questions whilst Julie reconnects herself.
Thank you very much. That's great. So, members, any comments or questions for Meredith and Kate in the meantime? Councillor Atherford, please.
Yes, can I ask, and I appreciate this might be a long-winded answer, but why does it take 5 months to put together an EHC? I mean, it's a complex process, I appreciate, but 20 weeks.
So I'll make it basically that's the national time frame that's set, and I agree with you. It feels like a long time. 5 months does feel like a long time in the life of a child. Part of the reason it is 5 months is that information is sought from a range of different professionals, and they are all given a time frame that they need to respond to, and then also it's the conversations with the children, young people as well. I suppose assurance needs to be given that it doesn't mean that things are not being put in place for that child or young person. So it's not a case of you get your EHCP and suddenly the world opens. I mean, the really good work that takes place ensures that the conversations are continuing to happen with the education provider, and that the right support is being put in place, and that we are looking at changing it and tinkering it. And then when that support no longer meets needs, an EHCP is requested. This is, sort of the utopia, and then it goes through a process of looking at all of the different factors, the education, the health and the care of that child or young person, to make sure there is the right support in place. So it is a long process. It's one that sets nationally. We do really well at making sure that we're within the timescales. It does feel difficult, but it's not the case that there isn't support in place. And I don't know if Kate wants to add anything, or if Julie's re-emerged into the world of the IT that will confirm that.
Thank you. In the meantime, we'll come to Kate. Thank you, Kate. And I've got you, Julie, and I know you want to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to emphasise the point, the 20 weeks is the maximum as opposed to the minimum, so we always aspire to finish them. One of the key elements is the voice of the young person in the planning, to make sure that, you know, their needs and thoughts are being respected, and sometimes that can take a little time because the person has got to have that relationship with them, because it's not enough for us to use the parent's perception of the young person's voice. We have to have the young person, particularly with our younger children. That can take a little while to get, so it's making sure that the quality of that report is as strong as it can be.
Thank you for that. Do you want to come back, Councillor Atherfold?
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. From a teaching point of view, 5 months is an awfully long time in the school year. I appreciate. Yeah, 5 months is an awful long time in the school year. And I appreciate there's an awful lot of people we've got to go to and sort information and put it all together and come up with where we are. But it just strikes me as a little bit long-winded, but that's probably my impatient nature.
No, and we hear you. So, and as Kate has said, we do look to do it in the fastest time possible. But what we are monitored on nationally is meeting that 20-week, so that we, you know, again, there'll be analysis of what the median time is and what the shortest time is as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Rand.
Thank you very much, Pat, for letting me come back, and really picking up on your praise, rightful praise of everything that's been done in children and families, together for families, if you like, the whole thing. And one of the common themes, and something that I picked up in Julie's summary, which I thought was excellent, by the way, is, as she mentioned, we're very cost effective given the poor level of funding. And that is the issue that I find really, really hard to understand, that Cornwall still, over all the years that I've been involved with early years and primary schools, the level of funding for Cornwall, we are always sitting at the bottom, and there doesn't seem to be any recognition of the fact that areas like Cornwall, and I'm not saying we're the only deprived area, of course we're not, but these areas, there doesn't ever seem to be any sort of levelling up, to use a common phrase of date. Why is that? Why is it such a struggle? You know, that's my big question, but the reason that we do so well is because of the huge amount of commitment and caring by those involved, and that is what is exceptionally good in Cornwall. And that, you know, I take my hat off. I think you're absolutely amazing. We've got some amazing officers, amazing team, and that goes right the way through the schools as well. And you know, from my experience, there is a struggle, and we'll get on to more when we go on to early years, but this area, special educational needs, there should be investment, there should be better support, and I'm really, really sad that we have to do really good against that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rand.
So I'm happy to sort of take that. So thank you for the recognition that the teams and the system works really hard to be efficient and to do it at the most value for money and efficient way possible. It is very much about how we work, how we put the child and the young person at the centre, how we look at the strengths of the child, the young person, the school, the family, the community, and it is very different nationally. And I think that you should all be rightfully proud of that challenge that you've given to ensure that the system is like that within Cornwall, and we look to maintain that way of working. Funding is really difficult. It is something that has been an issue for a long time. time. There have been a number of lobbying attempts, and we're still part of some of those lobbying attempts about making sure that the right money is coming into the DSG. You know very well that there is a disparity across the country, and that's a historical disparity which is now going on 15-20 years old, and there have been conversations about how that changes. The SEND National Review is very much looking at how we do things differently. Kate, Julie and I were at a recent national meeting where the conversation was about the role of schools within that. And again, we're in a really strong place in Cornwall. Julie's already set out the fact that our schools are inclusive. More of our children with EHCPs are in mainstream schools than is the case nationally. So we have a huge amount to celebrate and a huge amount to build on, but there will always be that constant push for additional funding for Cornwall, and I think that I think you play that part in making that voice heard. And I certainly, when we've talked to the MPs, we've given information to Scott Mann, and he has understood what we have said to him as well about needing additional funding in our schools.
Thank you for that, Meredith. And Kate has put in the chat box that she's heard from Julie and she's not able to reconnect at the moment. So thank you for holding the fort, both of you. Anybody else want to comment or got a question? Dorothy, yes, off you go. Councillor Kirk. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Sorry, Pat. Thank you. Would you say that special educational needs provision is equal and even across Cornwall, or are there areas where provision is sparser than others?
Okay, I'm going to let Kate begin to answer that, and then I'll come in afterwards. So, Kate.
Clearly, where we have denser populations, we probably have denser provision. One of the things that we look at when we are looking at provision for children with EHCPs is to make sure that it is as close to home as possible. So sometimes that provision will be in mainstream, but it will be enhanced within mainstream. So it might be that in another situation where there was an ARB nearby, that the child would go to a resource base, but where there isn't one, we will enhance the provision within school. And we have lots of conversations with schools about what would it take to make sure that we can keep this child included, because I think for us one of the key strands is the social inclusion of those children. And I always have a concern when we have provision that's too far away. How do we make sure that they remain part of their community, because school is such a fundamental part of being part of your own community as a child. So there's a flexibility there. So yes, there is variation, but that some of that reflects the fact that we are doing those bespoke packages for children and young people to keep them as close to their community as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Any other questions, comments? Sharon has kindly, I'll come to you then in a second, Simon, thank you. Sharon has put in the chat box that Julie has said she's happy for any other questions to be sent to her. So if you feel you want more advice or you want some questions answered, then don't hesitate to email Julie. But for now, we've got Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Burton. Simon. Councillor Burton. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. And it was only a quick question, or a point maybe rather than a question. I think one thing that's really important is the ensuring that we understand a child's needs as much as possible before a transition, so that we've got effective communication onto the secondary school of that child's needs. And if you like, that EHCP process doesn't have to start again. So are we managing to make sure that where EHCPs are initiated, that if the 20 weeks is going over the transition period, that we've nailed it, and that information really gets to the secondary school, in its entirety, rather than having to start again?
I'll pass it on to Kate, if that's okay.
Yes, so the transition is a really key element, both at the early stages and at particularly obviously moving from primary to secondary school. We work very hard on those transition arrangements. Part of that is the placement of those children, making sure we've got the right placement. For some children who may have been able to remain mainstream in primary, it may not be the right answer when they move to secondary, so there are lots of conversations on that. This year we are being particularly focused on making sure information is flowing, because clearly with the partial closure of schools, some of those children may not have been in school, and we need to make sure that the information accurately reflects the stage that they're at and also any sort of emotional well-being elements that may come up through having had that period away from school if they haven't been in school. So yes, it's very focused. Sometimes they will slip through the net. There will be the odd one where we don't get it right. What we hope to do is, if we don't get that information across successfully, that school has a conversation with us, lets us know, so that we can always improve the quality of that.
Thank you. Do you want to follow that up?
No, thank you, Kate. That was really clear.
Thank you. Councillor Burden.
Yeah, two questions, completely different. What happens about cross-border? Do we have to pay the adjacent people, or is pro quo, as it were? Because I know some of the children have to go to Plymouth for their support, specialist support. The other thing is, what powers have we got to make sure an academy will take a child who needs that extra support within their catchment? Have we got any powers, or is it just persuasion?
So again, Kate's probably best to answer it. I mean, I'm happy to go into the funding, and so is Gareth if that's necessary, but Kate.
So in terms of funding, it will largely depend on the type of provision. So if it's an independent provider, then we will be paying that independent provider. So the funding follows the child is the rule of thumb. In terms of ability to promote admissions by academies, yes, we do have powers. I still have powers of direction even with academies. What we would always hope is that we do it through negotiation first, because what you don't really want to be doing is setting a child up to fail by them going to a school that's sort of being adamant perhaps that they wouldn't want that child on their roll. But we do have the ultimate powers of direction, and I have used those.
Thank you. Councillor Burden, do you want to ask anything else?
Sorry, Pat, just for clarity on that would then go to the Secretary of State.
I mean, it's before the present officer's time, but we did have an issue locally where the local school would not take the child, and the primary school moved in and kept that child for another year. So, you know, it's not always perfect, shall we put it that way.
Okay, thank you. Meredith, do you want to add something?
No, it's not always perfect, and that's the difficulty when there are so many children with an EHCP, that we're giving you the norm and what happens for most children. There are always outliers around that, but I am also assured that our SEND caseworkers, that Julie is the head of SEND and that Kate is the service director, move quickly to intervene, whether that be to have the conversations and to negotiate with the school, whether that be to make the decision to direct if that's appropriate. So I think that there is a understanding and a really good listening to what is happening, which isn't necessarily the case nationally.
Thank you. Okay, there aren't any other crosses. So if I may, two congratulations and a question from me. The congratulations obviously on the 100% in January and meeting the timescale. It's a fantastic performance and noted nationally, so well done. And the bit about inclusion, 2.9 in our papers, that fits so well with what Kate has described as our belonging agenda, and having worked in a school myself with an ARB that was very well thought of, I know how successful that is. In Bodmin there were people when I was there from out of the area. What Neil's just been saying, you know, are they within their own catchment area? People were actually queuing up to actually get their children in. So that inclusion thing is really important. So thank you and congratulations on that. Just one thing on page 13, 2.10, it talks about this the future development being identified and endorsed by the multi-agency SEND board. Is that an overseeing board, or is that the multi-agency group who work through the assessments, or is that a different group?
No, so SEND board has got a mixed membership. I chair it, and it is a strategic board, so it will oversee the progress that we're making on the actions within our SEND strategy. It has representatives from health, it has parent carer representatives, and I'm delighted to say yesterday we had a meeting and we had 2 young people on the board as well, so they tend to rotate. And as I said to Meredith, it was a very powerful, almost particularly because we were doing it virtually, because the whole time the young people's faces were on the screen as I was chairing the meeting, and it really made sure that our decisions that we were doing were absolutely influenced by the needs of young people, and they were, you know, they were very articulate about what they felt those developments needed to be.
Oh, thanks for clarifying that. I didn't know if it was the same group who did the assessments. No, that's fine. Thank you for clarifying that, and fantastic to have young people there. Well done, brilliant, brilliant. Okay, I can't see any other crosses, so we can go to the recommendation, which is on page 10. If Debbie is kind enough to read that out, I can then ask for a proposer and a seconder.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendations, as Chairman has said, are printed on page 10. 1, that the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee recognise the performance of the Council in relation to the education, health and care assessment and provision arrangements for children and young people with complex special educational needs. And 2, that the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee endorses the way forward for future strategic developments relating to special educational needs and or disability.
Thank you, Debbie. And I see that Hilary, Councillor Frank is happy to propose. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
I think that was Councillor Rand first. I think so. Councillor Rand seconding. So do we need to do a roll call for this? For the vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Debbie. Over to you then. Thank you.
So the recommendations are as read, and they've been moved by Councillor Frank and seconded by Councillor Julian Rand. So if I could go to members, again, it's for, against or abstain. Councillor Atherfold.
For.
Councillor Burden.
For.
Councillor Elliott. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
For.
Councillor Gammon.
She's still having problems, I'm afraid, Debbie.
Oh, I think she's been able to join.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Gammon.
Welcome back, Jackie.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Massey.
For.
Councillor Massey.
Really?
Yes, I can now. Thank you, Councillor Massey.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Mustoe.
Yeah, for.
Councillor Rand.
For.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Sawnby.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
Thank you, Chairman, and that's unanimously agreed by the committee.
Thank you, Debbie. So we move on to agenda item 7, which is the Childcare Survey 2020. And I think we're welcoming Sharon to present that. Over to you, Sharon.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay, this is about the childcare survey that we undertook in the latter part of 2020. I need to stress it's not the childcare sufficiency assessment. That is something that we should be undertaking on an annual basis to inform what the provision looks like in Cornwall, but for obvious reasons, because of COVID last year, that wasn't able to happen. What we wanted to do though was to understand what the position looked like for families as a result of COVID, and to see whether there were any areas of concern that we needed to focus on, and also work with providers if there are any identified gaps in provision. Just to say as well is our early years providers, as you know, have remained open throughout COVID, and have worked really hard to ensure provision is available for all children, particularly in this latest lockdown. And it's fair to say that they've gone above and beyond actually to really make sure that their premises are open and they're accepting children. And we've worked really hard to keep it being engaged with them. So myself and colleagues in Lisa's service in early years service, and Carol Kimberley, we've met regularly with providers to sort of understand and be, and work with them where they were encountering any issues or difficulties. But in terms of the survey, so if I can take you to page 16 of the pack, you'll see that there were some areas in 1.3 where families have given us some feedback and some key points where they were struggling in terms of childcare. So it was difficult for families of school-aged children to find suitable childcare, and this is probably, as I said, because services, wraparound services and holiday clubs were not available because of the impact of the pandemic. What was concerning was, that 54% of families reported that it was difficult or very difficult or fairly difficult to find suitable childcare for children with SEN, and that is something that we do need to look at. And again, my colleagues in the early years services we're already sort of identifying what needs to happen in that respect. The out of hours services have also been affected. I mean, most of what has come out, as I said, is what we would have expected to see during the corona and the COVID period. We are also concerned about the lack of provision for babies and under twos, and quite recently we've had a couple of settings that have come to us and said that they're struggling in that area. So what we're looking to do is how we can support settings to be able to offer a wider age range of provision. Throughout the pandemic, we've been monitoring the attendance of children at settings, and also whether settings have had to close because of cases, for example, or whether staffing issues, and also asking where there's been any concern around numbers falling off. We've been able to provide support to settings as well, and to ensure that families can access provision by actually increasing the hourly rate that we were able to pay to settings using some of the contingency funding that we had. So we're able to increase that hourly rate and also make some discretionary funding available to settings, just really to keep them going and keep them open and keep them supporting our families. One of the things that we have noticed is that we have seen a drop off in terms of childminders. So this coming forward in the summer, we're going to be doing a bit of a recruitment drive to try to bring sort of childminders back into the provider service. They seem to have been the ones that we've lost the most of. Now, again, that's not unexpected because of childminders running, provision in their own homes. You can understand why that may have been affected. But in terms of the survey, it has identified some key areas for us, and from that we will be developing an action plan of the areas of focus, so particularly around the SEN, as I mentioned, and that wraparound sort of out of hours childcare. but this is only sort of step one, because we do need to do that childcare survey, childcare sufficiency assessment as well. And the expected time is that we will be undertaking that is in the summer, when we are fully out of lockdown. So as I said, sort of June or July time is the time we're planning to. All of this is COVID dependent, but hopefully we will be on plan to do that. As I mentioned, we were able to uplift the hourly rate. So if you look at section 3.1, you can see where we were able to support our settings in that respect, and therefore also make sure that provision was available to families. I have included the full survey outcomes as an appendix in the document, so as you're able to have a look at that. But I think it's fair to say that there weren't any significant surprises. There were concerns, as I said, around SEN and around that out of hours, and that's certainly given us an indication of where our action plan needs to go. I think the other thing that it has highlighted is that in terms of our 2-year-old provision, so we had previously seen a drop in the take-up of 2-year-olds. So that's 2-year-olds who are able to access funded places, and Cornwall's numbers had dipped a little bit. But in the latest late information, so that's the local authority interactive tool, that's unvalidated data at the moment, but it's information that the DFE gathers during this period. It has shown that we've seen an increase in terms of 2-year-olds taking up that provision. We are also highlighting and targeting our families. Targeting probably not the right word, but we're in contact with our families where we know that they are potentially eligible for those free places and haven't yet taken up that approach. So we've revisited a previous initiative that we had. We used to refer to it as the golden ticket, but it's actually positively, proactively contacting the families and saying, basically, did you know you are eligible for a 2-year-old funded place? And then giving them a code for them to actually be able to take to their setting to be able to access that provision. And we are really pleased to see that although they're unvalidated, we have seen a slight increase in that. So that's really, really positive. In terms of our action plan, so it's 3.1, so starting from page 3.10, starting from page 19, about what we need to look at and what are our duties in response of childcare sufficiency, and also how what we need to focus on for the action plan. Section 5 just explains a bit about how we advertised and sought engagement. Initially, we were a little bit concerned about, the responses that we may get, how widely known was the survey. And we've represented, it's nearly 1,000 children in the survey. So it's not a bad response. But I think what it's told us again is the response rate was affected because of the COVID situation. So I think a learning point for us for when we do the full sufficiency assessment is really how we get the information out there to parents and families, as widely as possible, so we get really detailed information about what sufficiency looks like for families in Cornwall. I've included a little bit of information about the funding in section 6, so you can see that we get funded £28.5 million. It's ring-fenced funding purely for early years, and that is for those 2, 3 and 4, well, it's all the items listed in 6.2. So I think this is our, as I said, this sufficiency action plan will address the areas highlighted in the survey and will really give us a further focus on what we need to look at when we undertake the full sufficiency assessment, which will take place in the later part of this year. So I hope that coupled with the appendix gives you a flavour of the activity that's been going on during this last sort of 6 to 12 month period. Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry, I was on mute then. Thank you, Sharon, for a good document for us, because I know some of the committee had raised concerns. So thank you for that, and the detail in that, and the action plan. So I've got Councillor Atherfold first, and then Councillor Rand. David, over to you.
Yeah, it's a really useful survey, actually. I think it opens up a whole number of questions. But for me, it's the survey itself. And I'm concerned that Truro and Roseland come out with 103 responses, and just underneath that, almost a fifth coming from that community network area, possibly due to good communication from one or more schools in the area. So I'm asking the question, were the schools all briefed in the same way as to how it was to be delivered? Yeah. And it clearly isn't being. For example, Camborne, Pauli, Luggan and Redruth came out with 36. Well, given the population density of that area, it's not really in proportion to that of Truro and the Roseland. Yeah. So I'm just thinking we might need to look at how we do the survey.
For sure, that's definitely flagged to us. It was promoted widely through education and early years bulletins, through direct contact with providers, through school settings, and yeah, we do recognise that there are inconsistencies. Yeah, you very valid points, Councillor Atherfold. It's something we will be addressing as widely as we can, because we will do everything we can to get the response from families and settings when we do the detailed assessment.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Rand.
Yes, picking up on that, thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you for the report. And I know there's so much hard work goes into these things. And I wonder whether members, if we'd known this survey was going on, and perhaps I should have done, perhaps we could have made a few phone calls just to gee a few people up, make sure that they got their families to respond. I think picking up on what David said, I think the more people that respond to these surveys, the more validity there is in them. The other thing I want to raise again is the funding, the poor levels of funding for early years foundation stage. In my view, it is an investment. I haven't heard anybody say that early years isn't anything but really, really good for children, setting them up for their learning journey. And yet, I look back, I thought as treasurer of a preschool I helped set up with two other teacher colleagues way back. I looked, and I've got figures for autumn terms 16 and 17 and 17-18 in terms of funding, and I noticed in 2016-17 our 2-year-olds were receiving £4.85. That's what we were getting for a 2-year-old to be funded, and the 3-year-old plus we were getting £4.03, and that included a 15p supplement from Cornwall Council. So we were trying to make the difference. If you compare that with 3.1, where you're saying what the funding is, that was 16-17. 17-18, we'd gone up on 2 years to £5.20. That's 17-18. I mean, so nothing's happened in all that time. Would there have been a little inflationary cost increase, do you think, over that time? Would our lovely workers that give a commitment in the early year settings deserve a little bit of a pay rise? Are there other costs, whether it's rates, electricity, God knows what, that comes on, and yet no recognition of that in the funding rate? And similarly, the 3+ years, £4.16, no supplement, we couldn't afford it in there, and we've gone from £4.10 to £4.25. That's a huge increase, 2.1%. My God, over this period, we're getting a bit greedy here, or a bit slack, are we, in controlling this? No, all jokes apart, I think it is absolutely appalling that Cornwall, and I know there's probably other places in the country that suffer exactly the same, but it's appalling that we are not able to invest in our young people's education. It is a tragedy, because it does make such a difference I've seen it, I've felt it, I've experienced it. My own child was the first young person in our preschool when we set it up, and I know how much it benefited him. But I saw countless children go through there and were primed, ready to go across into reception and the primary school. And the ones that came in outside, not having experienced that, were definitely at a disadvantage and needed a lot more attention and care and support. So this is a great report. We need to give it more validity, getting more people to comment on it. But again, this has got to be, we've got to keep up that fight with the government of whatever colour to make sure that our young people are sufficiently funded to do the job. It is an investment in the country's future, let alone Cornwall's. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your passion, Julian, which we recognise. Before I move to Sharon, if she wants to reply, and Meredith, Lisa has put an X in the box. So over to you, Lisa, first.
Hello everyone, Lisa Harvey, Service Director for Children's Health and Wellbeing, and as Sharon says, the quality of early years comes within my portfolio. So just really wanted to kind of add on to Sharon's commentary around the role that our health visitors are playing in increasing the uptake of children attending the early year settings, because we're all very, very passionate to ensure the majority of our 2, 3 and 4 year olds attend the early year settings. And the health visitors, obviously we're in a unique position that health visitors are undertaking developmental assessments to all children in Cornwall, and our current performance rate of that is 97%. So that means that 97% of 2 year olds receive a developmental assessment by one of our health visitors. And when we do that developmental assessment, we identify children and families with requiring additional support and place them in a pathway, what we call Universal Plus. And we're doing a lot of work with those Universal Plus families to help them into early year settings. And we've just put a proposal in to utilise some of the public health grant to fund some additional places for 2 year olds who are identified as Universal Plus, but they're not eligible for the national government 2 year old free funding placements. And we're very confident this is going to be successful, and as a result, due to the kind of work we've done in identifying these children and the work we've done identifying settings that could take these children, we think we can give support to an additional 340 children and their families, and also help an additional 177 providers by funding additional places for them. So we'll keep you informed as to whether it's successful, but as I said, I'm fully confident it will be. But I think it demonstrates one of the really positive things around integrating our early years with our health visiting, because the two teams can work together to really maximise the positive benefits.
That's fantastic news, Lisa. Thank you for your efforts with that, and I hope you're right and it is successful. But that's really, really good news. Not just about the funding and the fact that those little uns will get that extra support, but because, as you said, it's integrated care again. So fantastic. Thank you, Meredith.
So I don't think I need to add a great deal more, apart from to say that I think that the current crisis has highlighted the importance of early years at all levels, and that is being recognised in conversations we are having as well nationally. Yes, absolutely, Councillor Rand, your passion around early years is something I was reflecting with somebody yesterday. At the start of my career, I worked in early years, and it was about setting up early years provision and childcare. I was lucky enough for my children to benefit from that, but actually 20 years ago it was really difficult to find somewhere that both supported children in that early education, but also supported parents to go back to work as well. So huge strides have been made, but we need to make continued strides and make sure that we are focusing on our children, and Lisa is doing that as well with the Best Start to Life programme, which pulls all of it together. But as ever, funding in that area is key, and we continue to lobby government around that, as does the early years, as do early years providers.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Sharon, or is that covered?
No, only just to say that because of the uplift we were able to give providers in spring 2020 through that discretionary funding and increase the hourly rate, that was one of the most positive things that providers fed back. I mean, it is, yeah, and we continue to lobby. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments, members? Councillor Thomas?
Yes, I'm just wondering whether I'm just wondering whether the recommendation 3. Oh, thank you, Sharon, for your presentation, by the way. Is there a digital issue here of communication, because it's suggesting that the entitlement is required, the information is required. So is there some sort of communication issue you think that could be improved upon?
Do you mean in terms of targeting families?
Yes, well, just basically that's that connectivity which the family partnerships is trying to embrace between all the groups, but actually getting to the people who need it, the parents. Is there a problem there, do you think?
I don't think there's a problem, because it's a focus for, as Lisa said, health visitors. It's also a focus for our colleagues in early help as well. And we've worked with them in terms of getting the information out to the vulnerable families around that 2-year-old entitlement. We've liaised really closely across those organisations. So as if it's not getting in through the letter or the communication or email, then it's through the face-to-face contact. But again, I think all of this has been affected over this last 12 months due to COVID. As we go forward, I think the health visitors, are going to be, well, they are absolutely key, as are any early help practitioners working with those families, family support practitioners as well. And it is about ensuring that we're all joined up, and for sure that does happen. I mean, I work very closely with the early years heads of service around sufficiency and quality and improvement as well, and it's a shared priority across the whole of TFF. And the best start in life, I think, is as Lisa said, it's one of the best initiatives coming forward to engage with those families at that face-to-face level.
Yes, it's just the issue of making sure they're aware, which is what our 3rd recommendation seems to be focusing on. I just wonder whether our recommendation is strong enough. That's all. Okay. So we will perhaps come to that when we come to the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Lisa, do you want to come back before I go to Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, just to reassure you, Councillor Thomas, as I said, 97% of all families have a face-to-face conversation with a health visitor when their child is rising too, and always 100% of the time a part of that conversation is around the positive benefits of their children attending an early years setting. So we are really doing all we can to encourage those parents to find a setting, and our family information service will help them identify a setting, help them apply for it, and really, hold their hand through the whole process until their child actually starts. So I'm very confident we're doing all we can to encourage parents to place their children into early years settings.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Hi, yes, looking at page 26 and the need for out-of-hours childcare. Obviously, it's going to be quite complex to provide childcare between, I think it's 6 AM all the way up to 10 PM. And I know that 41% of the families in the survey said they weren't able to find that care. That concerns me, because if these people are trying to access work or study that they need childcare for, they're either going to potentially leave the children in a riskier situation or have informal arrangements with neighbours and so on, or just not be able to uptake the work or study that they need the childcare for. So how can we address or encourage providers to provide this, I suppose, quite complex service?
I think, oh, sorry, did I get bounced back then? I'm getting, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
This is one of the questions that we definitely feel has been affected because of the COVID situation. It's something that we need to draw out more when we do the full sufficiency assessment, because we know that there was some restrictions, particularly from the healthcare colleagues who were struggling to find that wraparound childcare if they were working nights and things, for example. So it gives us a sort of a heads up, but we need to drill down more to find out what that looks like across the whole of Cornwall, and it's one of the main areas of focus. I can't say any more at the moment because I think we need to drill down and get, you know, a more detailed picture, and also look at where we've potentially lost provision, and we don't have that information at the moment, where we've actually lost that, because that wasn't one of the, you know, the overnight care wasn't one of the questions the DFE were looking at in terms of the returns that early years providers had. So it's a flag for us to pay more attention and to really scrutinise in the next round.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really good to hear.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, members? No? Okay, then we can go to the recommendation. Were you saying, Councillor Thomas, that you wanted point 3 in the recommendations strengthened or amended?
Well, having had the conversation, I can understand a little bit more, but I still think that as a committee we should certainly be strongly supporting the efforts that are being made to proactively contact. Maybe other members have other wording they may think, or it may be just fine as it is. But I can see that action is taking place. It's just that connectivity I want to encourage, and maybe it can be done through other ways as well.
Okay. Do you want to put strongly endorse then?
Yes, that's a lovely word, isn't it? Strongly endorse.
Right. Well, that's
my proposal. If you're happy to accept that.
Yes, I'm happy to second that for you, Councillor Thomas. And do we need to actually vote on it, Debbie, or?
Yes, we can include that, as it's only a small addition. We can include that in the main recommendations. Yes.
Thank you.
So if Debbie reads the recommendations, we'll look for a proposer and a seconder. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. The 3 recommendations are that the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the survey outcomes in Appendix 1, Childcare Sufficiency Survey outcomes, and consider if any additional analysis or actions are required, which you've done and will be reflected in the minutes of today's meeting. 2, the committee endorse the approach proposed by Together for Families Education Services in the development of an action plan by June 2021 to address the issues reported by families who completed the survey. And 3, the committee strongly endorses the continued planning activity to proactively contact families to inform them of their entitlement to 2-year-old funded provision.
Thank you, Debbie. Could I have a proposer, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you. So I've got, yes, so Councillor Rams has proposed and Councillor Elliott has seconded. Thank you. Over to you then, Debbie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we could go to the roll call, members, and again it's for, against or abstain. Councillor Atherfold.
For.
Councillor Burden.
For.
Councillor Elliott. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
For.
Councillor Gammon.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Massey.
For.
Councillor Mustoe.
For.
Councillor Rand.
For.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Sawnby.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
For.
And Councillor Mike Thomas.
For.
Thank you, Committee Chairman. That those 3 recommendations have agreed unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, members. So we move on to item 8, which is a paper about the Ombudsman's report findings, and it's Sharon again. So over to you, Sharon. Busy day for you today.
Thank you. So this report is following an outcome of a complaint investigation by the Ombudsman in relation to a pupil who had missed school due to medical or health needs. The first thing I need to say is that this relates to a case from back in February to June 2019, and there has been a delay in it getting through the Ombudsman's process again because of COVID. So that's why it's some 2 years on that this report is coming to committee. The Ombudsman's report has already been considered by the Standards Committee in its draft form in January this year, and the reason why the draft report went forward is because we've accepted the findings. So Together for Families accepted the findings of the report and have undertaken the recommendations as outlined in terms of changes that we needed to make to systems and processes, and also apologising to the family in that respect. So I want to assure you that those actions have been taken. The actions recommended we had already started to implement back in September 19 in terms of how we audit returns from schools when children are absent or away from school due to medical or health needs. You can see from the report it is quite detailed, and it does lay out specific recommendations for Together for Families to undertake, and they include an audit of returns that we get from schools in terms of children absent. So it's where children fall on under Section 19 of the Education Act. Excuse me. The way we will be undertaking that is that through our colleagues in the statistics service, so in Together for Families Statistics Service, we will be auditing the returns that we get from schools in terms of that attendance, so as we can start to identify where children are absent for cumulative or consecutive periods of time, so when they hit that 15-day trigger. It's really important to note that it's a shared responsibility. It's schools who are the initial responsible body for the children that attend their school, but it's also our responsibility as a local authority where we have duties in respect of education provision when children are unable to attend school. We have to have a named officer responsible for same in the local authority, and at the moment that's me. It has to be a name rather than a role of a person, and we must publish that information in a policy, and that is included at Appendix 2 of this report. That policy document needs to be reviewed annually, and again, because of COVID, the last formal review was 2019 in November, but that has already addressed the implication or the recommendations from the report, which is why, as I said, we acknowledged where there was concern, and we have sought to ameliorate the risk of this happening again. So I've included a copy of the report for members to read, and also the policy document. We have to respond to the Ombudsman by the 21st of April in terms of the recommendations that they've made, and as it is a report by the Ombudsman, the Council has certain responsibilities in terms of publishing that report and making recompense to the family, and we have, as I said, undertaken all of that. So yeah, it was a learning point for us. It's a learning point that we have been making sure schools are aware of, and it also links to our role in terms of the provision of the CHES, the Community Hospital Education Service, that we have for children in Cornwall who are unable to attend school long term due to medical or health needs. And members will recall that we have recently further strengthened our responsibilities in that area by entering into the strategic partnership with the Wave Multi-Academy Trust. So they provide our APAs and they provide the Community Hospital Education Service on our behalf. So I do feel, as I said, we've done all that we can to ameliorate those risks of this happening again. But the key thing is it's the ongoing activity that needs to happen, and that is that routine scrutiny of the returns that we get from school, so we can look for any emerging trends or themes where children's absence is higher in particular areas or across clusters of schools, and also we can be there to both support and challenge schools if we're feeling that their response isn't necessarily where it needs to be. Schools need to make those reasonable adjustments to support children who are unable to attend schools as well. So it's working, it's parents and families, schools and the local authority working in partnership to, as I said, to ensure that this situation doesn't happen again. You're on mute again, Pat.
I've kept my mic on the whole time, but my tummy was rumbling so loudly while you were speaking that I thought I'd better mute my tummy. Okay, so I've got Councillor Frank and Councillor Thomas. So Councillor Frank first.
Thank you, Pat, and your rumbling tummy. And thank you, Sharon. That was a clear report. So, colleagues, I'm a member of the Standards Committee, and I can confirm that we did debate this at our January meeting. And Sharon, just around that, I just wanted to ask a couple of points. So at that stage, it was the draft report. Can you confirm there have been no changes to this final report from the report we debated in January? But also, I think part of the debate in January focused around the need to ensure that there is enough, dare I say the word, finances and resources to monitor the data that schools are providing around school child absence. So could you just confirm a little bit around that piece, please?
Yes, of course. So there were no changes to the final report. That's the first thing. And then in terms of being able to analyse the returns, yes, funding has been secured through the DSG to ensure that there is that resource within the statistics team. So there are 2 officers that now can scrutinise all of that work. We've also, as we have a dedicated, what we call a SNIS officer, a child not in school officer, who also works directly with schools, with families. She is the advocate for the families and in liaison with schools. So yeah, it feels like we're doing all we can, and as Kate has just mentioned, those posts are permanent, so we've got that capacity.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for that addition. I've got Councillor Thomas and then Councillor Atherfold. So Mike first.
Thank you, Pat. I'm not quite sure why this case didn't come to us first. Perhaps that there's a constitutional reason why that's the case. But I'm really struggling with this because it really raises in my mind more questions than answers for us to be, as a scrutiny committee, to actually scrutinise. Am I right in assuming that this applies to all schools, regardless of there being academies or not? I assume it does. So it's council and academies. I don't want to know the name of the student. I don't want to know the name of the family. I don't want to know the name of the school. I don't want to even know the name of the town. But I would like to know whether this is a primary school or it's a secondary school. And I cannot understand, if the law was passed in 1996, why there hasn't been some sort of system in place within Cornwall County Council and Cornwall Council to actually monitor attendance and data that presumably is being fed from schools by the school's attendance officer to the previous council and this council. So I'm a bit sort of surprised that we got to this point. I'm also very concerned about the information on page 18, item number 9, which refers to pupils who are not of compulsory school age. Now, to the best of my understanding and knowledge, the law changed in September 2013 that young people are required to stay in education until they're 18. And although the term isn't compulsory, it's required. So is there not a real issue of concern that we are not actually aware of where the 16 to 18 years of age people are? Is it, and especially those who have EHCPs, education, health and care plans. Is it not possible we're laying ourselves open for potential future legal action by those young people themselves, who would say that it was the responsibility of the council to actually ensure that they were receiving a proper education between the ages of 16 and 18? So for me, what comes across in these papers, there are more questions than, in a sense, answers to what's going on. And I realise what you're doing at officer level is what has to be done. And thank you very much for what you're doing, Sharon. But it seems to me that a policy in the directorate needs to really address this and satisfy members that we are not laying the council open to future litigation.
Before Sharon responds to that, I will say that, to my knowledge, and I don't have a particularly good memory, I have to admit, this is the first time we've ever had an Ombudsman report come to committee. So this is a first. So in terms of the order in which they came, Mike, I don't know. We've never had one before. So and there must have been reports, but so it's interesting that was that a change of policy at the Sharon, or
I don't know, because it was written as a report from the Ombudsman rather than a letter. There's legal requirements, but I don't know about the process. I followed the process I was advised in terms of standards.
Thank you. Debbie's crossing, so Debbie, can you enlighten us as to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Because it is a local government and social care ombudsman report, that does fall within the remit of the standards committee. So they consider all the ombudsman reports, and there was a request to share the information with this committee as well. When it did go to standards committee, I think the chairman and vice chairman of this committee were advised and did attend. So it's something that we wanted to share with this committee, to highlight the issues, but also to show you the actions that have been taken to address it. So yes, all complaints will initially go to the standards committee.
Okay, and Hillary's just informed us that there have been children issues before, and Simon is adding Cornelius Olivier.
He's joined our meeting, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Sally, did you want to say anything? Sorry, I'm getting repetition. Okay, thank you, James. Sally, did you want to come in on this?
I was just going to say that I think it's a welcome development. That yes, in previous times things went to standards and there was no visibility from the Children's Committee, so we have brought an item from social care previously to this committee, and this is coming here today. I'd hope that this was now built in as how we go forward, because it's really useful for you to have that visibility. It certainly wasn't the case in the previous administration, but it's a step in the right direction so that you've got all the information that you need.
It is indeed. Thank you for that, Sally. Right, having interrupted the conversation between Mike and Sharon, back to Sharon now to answer Mike's questions.
So in terms of this Section 19 responsibility in the 1996 Education Act, as you know, those acts get amended but quite regularly. Where we first became aware of the local authorities' responsibility was following a very similar case for the Leeds City Council back in, I think it was May or June 2019, which was a very similar, and we were aware of that and then acted accordingly. And that was where the Ombudsman found that the LA at that time should have had more of an oversight on schools. So the school knew that the child wasn't attending, but the LA, although it was in the returns, you know, scrutinising however many thousands of returns, they hadn't picked that up. So that's why we made those changes very quickly to start looking at that. And one of those things that we're doing is we have to do an audit of our school's return. And what we're doing is we're all, for the last full year of pupil data that we have, which was 18-19 academic year, again because of COVID, we're looking at that. So we're looking at that retrospectively, so as we can identify roughly how many children hit that trigger period. We're also looking at our autumn term 2020 data as well, again a full term's worth of data. So as we can start to see where there are any outliers now. So we're absolutely undertaking that, because we need to be, sure that going forward that we've got a handle on this. But we also need to be, and we're having conversations with schools, and Kate meets regularly with senior leaders about schools' responsibilities here as well, and the fact that they need to make those reasonable adjustments for children who are unable to attend school. So as I said, it's about that partnership approach. In terms of the post-16 side of things, so when the RPA, you remember the raising participation age came in, which I think was 2015, that was about young people aged 16 to 18 having a destination. So they need to be in work-based learning, education or training. It's not about statutory school age per se, so compulsory school age. So that's why our duties, so a local authority's duties under section 19 is specifically about statutory school age. But when children have an education, health and care plan, obviously that would determine what that education provision needs to be. So that would be covered in that. We are looking as well at the moment of a post-16 offer for children and young people who have previously been in the CHES up to that sort of statutory school age leaving position, who are not potentially able to access that education, so normal post-16 designations, and we are exploring whether or not there is an opportunity for a post-16 kind of CHES. But it needs to be, we already do that. If you look at the provision we have in Suena, for example, that is for 14 to 18 year olds, and we have education provision within the Suena unit. And part of the exit strategy for young people when they leave the unit is how do we reintegrate them back into their communities and back into education. So we are, where there, for a very small number of children, that is already in place. And what we need to also look at and consider is there a need for something else at that post-16 level? But where it gets difficult is the funding that we get for what, the statutory school age is, well, this is very different. So it would be what we could look at from the post-16, working with FE providers, for example, and that is something else that we are exploring through other avenues, but not from the statutory route.
If I could briefly come back, I'm very grateful for Sally to come back and explain the Constitution position, and I welcome that. I just wonder whether the issue of the post-16s have actually been tested in law, and whether at some point this could well be become statutory, or an interpretation of what actually is in the 2013 rules. But I appreciate all you're doing there, Sharon. Thank you very much, and thank you for explaining it so carefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Julian. My apologies if your hand was up first, but I'm putting you in after Councillor Burden, which is the ones that I'd seen there. Okay, Councillor Atherford next, please.
Yeah, I'd like to build on Councillor Thomas's comments. I mean, I think this raises a huge number of questions, and I really would like some further detail. I think there have been a failing on a number of parts. My experience of school attendance is it's very rigorous, very thorough, and having been ahead a year and monitored all the students in my year on a weekly basis, I can't believe this has fallen through the cracks, and that really concerns me. The question of whether it was an academy or not, I think, is a valid one, and to think that that information is passed back to county and hasn't been acted upon, I find very hard to believe, really. And then I'd like to also think about the amount of money that was paid in compensation. Was that to fund alternative provision the parent had to provide? Was that by way of an apology? It seems a very specific amount, and I just wondered why that might have been. And to be fair, I don't really think we have enough information here. I think we could do with I'd like some more information, and if this is the one case that's fallen through, it leads to the question, how many more?
I can come back straight. In terms of the funding, the amount was recommended by the Ombudsman, and they have a sort of a set of criteria by which they make a recommendation for funding. So that's where that amount came from. In terms of the attendance, as I said, it's something that we've been looking at since we first became aware back in 2019, and it is very much a focus now, because we've learnt from this, and we will not be making having this oversight going forward. I think as I said, that's why we didn't challenge the report. We accepted the findings. It's not just Cornwall, it's not an excuse, but it's not just Cornwall. As I said, Leeds City Council were also found wanting, and that's what prompted us to already start taking the actions. For this young person, we are, and there is contact ongoing with the family, is my understanding, to look at how that young person can be further supported. And what we need to do now is work out, in terms of our audit and our scrutiny and monitoring of schools' returns, is look at how that can go forward and what we will learn potentially from that. And that activity is very much underway. And as schools are now back, it's going to be it will be a very high focus for us as children try to return to school. So I can give you the assurances we are on it now, for certain.
Thank you. Can I bring Kate in, who's indicated?
Could I just ask a supplementary? Was the family cooperating with the school and with yourselves throughout this incident?
I don't think it's fair to comment on the individual family at this time. I don't know, because there's ongoing activity. I don't know if Kate wants to say any more about that with the particular family.
No, I think that would be inappropriate, because the family aren't here to speak for themselves. Yeah. So I think that would be an inappropriate position to put that family into, particularly bearing in mind that this is a public broadcast. I just wanted to say that we, in a sense, we know the systems are working, because we have had a couple of situations subsequent to this where actually we've stepped in much earlier to say, right, OK, the clock is ticking. What's the provision going to be? I think there's something else that's going to probably help with this, which is the move by schools towards the remote learning provision that they've had. The breadth of the offer that now might be available to a young person who's unable to attend school for medical reasons is actually broader than it's ever been. And whilst that does require some commitment from the school in terms of if you've only got one young person, that's quite dislocated, there is some flexibility. And I know the schools have been talking about that as an opportunity to keep their children and young people engaged in their home school rather than looking at alternative provision for that period of time. It won't be the solution for all, but just to provide Councillor Atherfold with that assurance, there have been subsequent cases that if we hadn't stepped in would have been in the same place, and we know that they're not.
Thank you, Kate. That's reassuring. Councillor Atherfold, do you want to add anything?
No, but it does highlight the point that there might be others in the system, and you've already picked those up. So I think this would be one to watch very closely, and it might be an idea to have it on our work programme for the future.
OK, thank you. I'm sure that Debbie will make a note of that, because we are hoping, although this is our last formal meeting, we are hoping to steal an hour of time for a development session to look at what we feel we want to put in as legacy for the next committee. Thank you. So I've got Councillor Elliott next, then Councillor Burden, then Councillor Rand. And sorry,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a couple of quick things. 20 years ago, when I was the SIMS officer for Southampton, LA, thanks to the IT team, we had good synchronisation with school data. So rather than you were talking about, looking back at 2018-19 data, now I think we're moving to orchestra from B to B. Have we got? Oh. Sorry, I just got kicked out there. Yes, I have to install that next week. We're moving to that. Have we got the ability to get that live feed from schools and know what's happening with their attendance data? And is TFF getting sufficient support from IS to ensure that dashboards, Microsoft BI, whatever, are giving you that information, because I know Capita sell that to multi-academy trusts, that you can see that data in the dashboard and nail things quickly. It was just making sure that with the money that IS have, that they really are supporting TFF. And the other one was to sort of go with what David said, that Pat then echoed, in terms of legacy projects. Obviously, as soon as I read this report, the thing that came to mind, which is in your supporting pupils not in school, is the whole elective home education. And I think that, if you like, 0 to 25, if we include the pupils with needs, that whole not in school, not in education or formal education settings, I think is a really important one for the next committee to look at, because it's something that really concerns me. And as Kate, I think, was who just said, or it might have been you, Sharon, sorry, the remote learning provision, schools have now nailed that, and therefore I think it's where those families are home educating because they feel their child can't cope in school. Maybe we can get them back in the fold, because it's millions of pounds worth of money that's lost through EHE. And if there's anything we can do to bring those children back in the fold, I think it would be a tremendous way forward, and maybe hopefully one good thing out of the pandemic.
I think Kate wants to come in on that, Councillor Rogerson.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
Okay.
Yes, and I think we would welcome the support of future scrutiny committee. At the moment, the DFE are not keen on the idea of a sort of flexible approach. As you will have seen from the publications, it's very much you need to return to school. We are having regular conversations with the RSC to say that actually the well-being of many of our young people might be supported by that remote learning offer. So I think we will keep pushing at that door, because I think it's really important. You've heard me say a couple of times earlier today, that school community is really important to those young people, and I think if we can find ways to be more flexible, that would be helpful. But I think at the moment, obviously, that drive is they need to be back in school. Aside from that, we have got a piece of work that we've done with the schools and agreed about a flexible approach for those who are anxious about returning to school. So we are exhibiting that flexibility, but it's probably we're being careful with it.
Thank you for that. Do you want to come back on anything, Simon, now?
No, that's brilliant. But yeah, it's just, let's hope the next committee keeps its equal focus on these matters.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Burton. Oh, do you want to say something, Sharon?
Only to say that we are getting all the support we need around the new systems, the orchestra and synergy, and it's because of that we're able to be much more, scrutinise the data. So yeah, it's a given. It's fantastic support.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Councillor Burton.
Yes. Can I support everything that Councillor Elliott Thomas and Atherfold has said, because I do think that it's I don't think it's a new thing, and I think that there are others out there as well, because I've had first-hand experience of that with somebody I know. But we're talking about almost something fictitious in a way, because we don't know the background to it, and there's always a story, isn't there? Why it started, who was against who, bullying at school, parent falling out with teachers, and it really gets quite involved, as it were, and you're never quite sure who to believe, actually, and of course, and then there's the classic cases of attention seeking, and that is very serious when a child's involved. And of course, with data protection, we're like talking about something we don't understand. It would be lovely to know the whole story, because I think and hopefully the officers do know the whole story and then can address it when the similar thing turns up. But that's what I'm concerned about. But don't kid yourself. There's several children not getting education. Some parents claim they're homeschooling, and you know how that's not being audited in any positive way, and because of the rules and regulations. So I just think that we need to keep a close eye. But I do think there are stories out there, and I think that you know, and people will say, well, you know, that child never goes to school because it's shielding, or at the moment, a wonderful excuse, isn't it? Or it's unwell, or it's got a temperature, and they rarely come to school. And but there's other underlying reasons for that, and I think it's how we make sure our teachers and those who are in charge actually address the difficulties that some families cause. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was probably more of a comment than a question. I don't know. It was, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, Sharon must not can fully understand where I'm coming from, because, you know, the Ombudsman may have found in favour, but I'm not going to ask if you agreed with the Ombudsman, but I think handing out a bit of money, I think is a bit dangerous, actually. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to thank you for that then, Councillor Burden. I just want to clarify the speakers, please. Next, I had Councillor Masto, but he has said that his question has already been answered. After that, I've got Councillor Rand, and then Councillor Gammon. And Simon, you're down. Do you want to speak again?
No, I'm all done, thank you.
Thank you. And then Councillor Thomas. Okay, so over to Councillor Rand next then, please.
Thank you very much, Pat. Picking up, actually, I'd made the note, and why I put my hand up was the home educated children. Obviously, there is a prime responsibility on the parent, but also we have a responsibility to make inquiries to seek assurance that the education that's being provided is right. And it made me think about, do we have, I know we've discussed this elective home education in the past, but do we have the resource, Sharon? Do we have the resource to be able to monitor that in the way that we need to? And then the second part of my question, then, it leads on. When you look at responsibilities that the council have to ensure that children are receiving the right education, here we are in the COVID world where children are at home getting degrees of education, some more than others if they have the device and the internet connection and they have a parent that can oversee it, but there's an awful lot that can't have that. Is there in the future some sort of failure of responsibility that we might encounter because we've gone through a situation and our children have suffered and we haven't picked it up and we haven't been able to resource the help? So that's my questions. Thank you.
Kate has indicated that she wants to speak. Shall I bring her in first, Sharon?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thanks. Over to you. Thanks, Debbie, for alerting me. Kate.
So, in terms of the resources for elective home education, we have sufficient to meet our statutory duty. I think we had some aspirations to do some more exciting work, but as your committee is aware, we've had an uplift in the number. What I would say is quite interesting is we're starting to see a return of some of those electively home educated children back to school. That in itself presents schools with problems because obviously there's an element of what have they been doing in the interim period, and some will have done lots and some may not have done as much. And then the second question, what I will say is schools were very thorough about monitoring the engagement of the children who were being educated remotely. They've been, you know, a number of schools we've talked to have got very detailed records of the percentage of engagement, type of engagement, return of work, etc. So I think it's quite different from lockdown one, and that's not a criticism of schools. You know, everybody was in a new world then, and that there was more variation, I would have said, in lockdown one about that engagement. And schools have gone above and beyond in many cases to make sure those children who haven't had access to the right resources. There will be children who have no doubt not had the same learning experiences as others. Some will have had different learning experiences and some may have had very little learning experience. What we're clear is our schools are very aware of the need to make sure that those children have those opportunities at the return to school. I'm very clear that we need to be very careful about the language that's used around lost generations and catch up. I keep saying quite flippantly, but I don't mean it flippantly. They're not lost. We know where they are. We know what to do and we know how to do it. And we have confidence in our schools that they will sensitively work with those children who may have some gaps or learning loss that they've experienced to ensure. But I don't think we should underestimate how resilient our children are. and that many of them will thrive on their return to school, and we look forward to seeing those achievements.
Thank you very much for that, Kate. I mean, I do know from my own son, obviously been doing his schooling at home. The problem I think that he's found, and I understand from other parents they have found, is that for a lot of the process, they did engage if they had that capability technically. But as the period went on, they found it very, very hard to motivate themselves further, and certainly my son found that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and also dropped off communication with their fellow schoolmates and so on and so forth, and that's been mentioned by a number of people. So you know, it is about how we respond to these situations, and I take your point. I'm not pointing any finger at all at schools. I think they've had an extremely difficult job to do, and my question really is focusing around any sort of responsibility that we have as an authority over and above what the school does to ensure that those children do have the ability to catch up if they've missed out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to add anything, Sharon, or has Kate covered it? Okay. Do you want to add anything, Kate?
I think to say yes, the local authority does have a responsibility, which is to make sure that schools are making effective use of the funding that's coming through, etc. We are doing that, so we have a programme to review that. It's a bit like when the online learning offer became compulsory. We did an audit of all of the schools as to what their offer was, made sure it was on their website, made sure that we felt it was appropriate. So all of those things do go on in the background. So yes, there is that quality assurance being undertaken.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for all your team's work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gammon next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on something that Sharon said. It is my understanding that Soana now is open to up to 25-year-olds, so post 16 should be included into Soana.
Soana is up to 18 years old. It's a young person's unit, and there is education provision within Soana for the young people that are within the unit, yes.
Well, at a recent board meeting that I sat at, it was announced that Soana was, if young people up to the age of 25 were able to access Soana, so maybe that's something that needs to be looked at.
Can I come in there, Councillor Rogerson? So certainly we'll look at that. So we don't commission services for Soana. You'll know this, but this is for the rest of Scrutiny. It's NHSE who do that. We are working hard to make sure that we get the right flow of information around Soana, but certainly we are provided, or we have supported with the provision of education in Soana, so we will check that as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Jackie?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And next, Mike, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you very much for letting me come back a second time, Madam Chair. It was just I didn't get an answer about whether it's a primary or secondary, and I think, as Councillor Atherworth said, we do need a little bit more information to scrutinise this. What difference would it make? Well, I suppose for secondary school there are vast more office staff involved, and we could understand how it may have happened. Primary schools may need an extra support. So I would like to know whether there's a primary or secondary, but I understand if you can't tell me. And I fully support Councillor Atherford's request that we perhaps revisit this as a work programme and suggest for the future administration. My particular interest, as I said when I spoke earlier, is what happens to post-16 students and care for them when they go sick.
Thank you.
I don't think it would be appropriate to say whether it's primary or secondary, because we need to ensure that the young person is confidentiality is absolute. and the post 16, as I said, I think we are looking at that at the moment. Yes. And in terms of revisiting, I mean, this is a work in progress, so we would certainly have more information at the end of this academic year about what has taken place during, you know, once as schools are now back. So yes.
Can I just make a final request to Debbie? Is it possible, when issues like this come up that do relate to this committee, I'm glad to hear that the chair and the deputy chair went to these standards. Is it possible for us to know it's happening, so that we've got a choice to go virtually or not, as the case may be? Whether that might be possible, Debbie, or whether that be appropriate as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Chairman. We could put those arrangements in place, and obviously the Standards Committee, all members can attend that meeting, and we'll make sure that that's put in place.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for that. So Mike was the last speaker I had there. We'll go to the recommendations in a moment, but before we do, and I ask Debbie to read them out and ask for a proposal from the seconder, I just want to thank Sharon for the 4 years you've been coming frequently to this committee. Sharon, your consummate professionalism is absolutely mind-blowing. I've never known you not able to answer a question. I've never known you not have the information at your fingertips. A really impressive performance over 4 years. So thank you very, very much. It's really good to have your level of knowledge and expertise. Thank you. I don't know, is Councillor Burden, we need to add more?
Yeah, I mean, there were some very good points made, Councillor Elliott and Atherford, and I just think that we need to help the new committee address some of these issues, and I think therefore we need a thorough update on how many people are not in school and how many are being home educated, because I do think that's an issue, and I think that if it's more public, I think we may get there. It will help the officers. And is there anything the officers would like us to put in the recommendations to help them? I've not got the words.
Debbie, do you want to come in on that? Is that why you put a cross in?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've certainly picked up through this debate that this is something that this committee would like the new administration to continue with. And as you said, Chairman, we will be having a legacy catch up with the members of the development session. Currently, we do have a list of items which will be going forward into the new administration, and that will be reflected in today's minutes and will be on that future work programme going forward.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. Okay, can I come to you then, Debbie, to read the recommendations, please? And if someone would like to propose with an X in the box and to second, that will be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommendations as within your agenda on page 30. The committee is asked to note the findings of the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman complaint report, and you've considered which actions you wish to take forward, and they will be taken forward into the new administration. And 2, the committee notes the actions taken by the Together for Families Education Services to address the recommendations as made in the Local Government and Ombudsman report. And we do have 3 crosses that have gone into the chat box. Okay. Councillor Rand, are you happy to propose?
Very happy.
Thank you. And Councillor Elliott, are you seconding?
Happy to.
Thank you.
Can I just check with Jackie that you were proposing or seconding, Jackie, as opposed to wanting to say something else?
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. So it's been proposed by Councillor Rand and seconded by Councillor Elliott. So if we could go to the roll call with members. Councillor Atherford.
For.
Councillor Burden.
For.
Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Formosa. Councillor Formosa. Councillor Frank.
4.
Councillor Gammon.
4.
Councillor Harvey.
4.
Councillor Kirk.
4.
Councillor Massey.
4.
Councillor Mustoe.
4.
Councillor Rand.
4.
Councillor Rogerson.
4.
Councillor Sawnby.
4.
Councillor Saunders.
4.
Councillor Mike Thomas.
4.
And can we go back to Councillor Formosa? So, Chairman, of all those members that are on the live stream and voting, those 2 recommendations have been carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, we're not bad for time. We had proposed that we'd have a 15 or a 10 or 15. Were you allowing, Debbie? Perhaps we'll take a 15-minute break at 12, and it's only 2 minutes past, so that's very well done. So thank you, and thank you again to Sharon for those 2 reports. So we will take, please remember to put your microphones off and your cameras. So we'll be back at 12:17. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Cornelius, the meeting's just taking a short break, so we'll be resuming at 12:17. So if you'd like to please switch your camera and microphone off. Thank you.
Hi, is that Debbie?
It is, yeah. The live stream is still operating.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for telling me.
Good.
Right. See you in a minute.
Glad you could join us.
Well, at what time did you say again, Debbie?
12:17.
12:17. Okay, lovely. Thanks.
Okay, everyone, thank you and welcome back to the second part. 2 slices of malt loaf, I hope, has dealt with my errant tummy. And welcome to Cornelius, Councillor Olivier. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to move on to agenda item number 9, which is on starts on page 54. Okay, protecting and safeguarding to prevent harm, an update on the Ofsted inspection. And if you remember, as a committee, we asked for this to be brought back before the end of this administration. So I'm going to hand over to Ben, and I understand that he's going to be joined by Alison Waters, who we were introduced to at the beginning of the meeting, who's going to present something about the life stories issue. But over to Ben to introduce it. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, I'm Ben Davis. I'm the Service Director for Children and Family Services. The purpose of the report today is to update you on the performance and achievements of the Council's Children's Social Care Services, and in particular our progress on our Ofsted Inspection of Local Authority Children's Services, or ILACS, action plan. I'll give a short overview and be joined by Alison to talk a little more about our life story work, and then hopefully allow plenty of time for questions and clarifications. I first sat before you as Service Director just over a year ago, several months after our ILACS inspection in October 2019, and presented at that point the draft ILACS action plan to you. The message I gave committee at that stage was that we were starting in a very strong position. Our inspection outcome placing us in the top 10% of children's services in the country in terms of our performance and outcomes, despite higher levels of deprivation and lower levels of funding than most. And at that stage, I warned that really the key risks we had to face were complacency as a result of being rated outstanding, and also the potential failure to make the right allocation of resources and investments to enable us to maintain our progress in the face of escalating demand. We want to maintain the standards and outcomes that we believe children in Cornwall and their families should experience, and which I believe they've got the right to expect. I think the report before you describes how we have responded to that. We have maintained a relentless and rigorous approach to continuous improvement, not resting on our laurels, but rather continuing to target the areas where we've identified we need to improve. We've also continued to make highly effective use of the resources available to us, and further strengthen the reputation that we have in Cornwall as one of the most efficient children's services in the country. That was recently shown, for example, in the independent consultancy Empower, rating us as one of the top 11 local authorities in the country for how we, for our efficiency in meeting high needs. And also, very importantly, has resulted in us, as we approach the end of the financial year, as being one of a minority of children's services nationally who are managing to deliver a balanced budget despite the additional demands of the pandemic. My last appearance before committee focused very much on the adjustments we've made through COVID-19 to respond to the pandemic. So whilst there may be questions on that, I won't dwell on that further in this initial overview, apart from highlighting that we welcomed in February experienced children's services colleagues from Hertfordshire Children's Services for a peer review of our COVID-19 response. And we were very pleased to get very positive feedback from Hertfordshire about how we had dealt with those pressures. In their words, they said, "We can see why you're outstanding." And we welcomed that external challenge, testing our own evaluation about how we've done over the last year. To cover specifically the 3 areas which were identified for further improvement in our ILACS action plan. First of all, there was the provision of suitable accommodation for 16 and 17-year-olds who are homeless but do not want to come into care. This was the biggest concern in our last Ofsted inspection, and where we had to face up to the fact that we were falling short and we had significant work to do. And I'm very pleased to say that we've made very significant strides in this area over the last year. We've made significant inroads in developing the professional capabilities that our staff and managers require to these issues, including refreshing the relevant training. We've significantly strengthened the management grip and oversight of the circumstances of relevant young people, including the mix of where young people are and how those networks interact together. And there's been really excellent work with our housing colleagues to increase the number and quality of specialist self-contained supported accommodation units for these young people. We've actually tripled the number of units compared to where we were at the time of the inspection in October 2019. With greater quality of accommodation and a greater number of options, that's enabled us to make better choices in getting the right match for young people. And so we're very grateful for the whole council's commitment to addressing this area, and particularly the support of our housing colleagues to make that a reality. It's partly how we have managed, even with the additional strains of the pandemic, to make sure that we have provided suitable, appropriate accommodation and move on for homeless 16 and 17-year-olds throughout that period, which I think is a real achievement for me to be able to stand before you today and say that, something which we probably couldn't have said with the same confidence in the immediate aftermath of our last inspection. The quality of plans was our second area for improvement from the inspection, and this is the kind of the improvement action that's never done in children's services, because clearly we can always strive to further improve the quality and impact of our plans, but it was highlighted as a particular area in the last inspection. We've made a number of changes. We have simplified the way we record and update plans on the child's record to act, if you like, as a scaffold for good practice to promote good professional decision making, and in that placed a much greater focus on what really matters, which is the impact of what people are doing on the child's lived experience, whether the actions that professionals are taking are actually making any impact on the life of the child. And we have placed a significant focus on the quality and impact of plans through our quality assurance processes, through audit, through the focus on in statutory reviews by both our managers and our children's rights advocates. Our children's rights advocates were identified as a real strength in our last inspection and have played an important role here as well. The key way we evaluate the quality and impact of our plans is through detailed case audit. We've maintained a rigorous programme of case audits over the last year, completed over 450 detailed case audits looking at the individual circumstances, and work with over 450 children and young people, and we collate those findings into our quality assurance and performance management framework. What that all adds up to is increased confidence that in general we have seen an uplift in the quality and impact of the plans that we're producing over the last year. For the final area, which was the quality and timeliness of our life story work, I know that committee has been very interested in this area previously in previous conversations, and I'm joined by Alison Waters, our head of children and family services in West Cornwall, to make some comments about the work that has happened in this area.
Thank you, Ben.
Hello, everybody. As Ben said, within our Ofsted inspection in October 2019, an area that was raised where we could make improvement was the quality and timeliness of life story work for children. At the time of the inspection, life story books and later life letters were only being completed for children who had placed for adoption. Therefore, around 30 life story books per year were being completed. However, we were aware that many more children were being made subject of care proceedings, and it was felt that these children also should have life story books and later life letters to explain why children and family services were involved in their lives and provide a clear and honest narrative for them. I know that many members have already seen the life story film which Carefree made, a very powerful and an emotional film whereby young people did not know their own lived experience, the confusion that this brings and how it affects a person's identity and well-being by not having a clear and honest narrative as to why care proceedings took place. I am very pleased to report that we have successfully recruited 3 full-time life story coordinators. Our workflows have incorporated action points, one being at the start of care proceedings. This will initiate the life story coordinator to start working and gathering information for the child's book and later life letter. No matter what the outcome and care proceedings, whether this be rehabilitation home, special guardianship or a care order, any child 10 years and under will now have a full life story book and later life completed. The 3 life story coordinators are based within the children in care teams. The workers being based within an area team will assist in supporting change in culture and promote and develop good practice across all teams. Too many young people who are in care for various reasons do not know their stories. Life story coordinators will also undertake direct work with young people. Young people who are in foster care and do not know or are confused over why they are in care. Direct work as to what, when, why and how, involving the young person in making their own book at their pace. It's not therapeutic life story work, but a way of assisting to link the past to the present and help both the young person, their parents and carers to understand how earlier life events continue to impact on both emotional and behavioural development. Making a life story book is more than creating a photograph album with identifying sentences, dates, places and names. It is an account of a child's life in words and pictures and documents. And there are various models of life story work. Our preferred model is present, past, present, future, a model by Joy Rees, frequently described as helping a child or young person answer the what, when, why and how questions, but also a model that promotes a sense of safety by starting the work in the present to enable a child to explore past trauma from a secure and safe base. We're all aware of the positive impact that knowing your life story has, but particularly a child who has been the subject of care proceedings. It brings a sense of identity, enhanced self-esteem and self-worth, gives a clear and honest narrative, gives an understanding of early life, enables them to share their past history with their carers. It dispels fantasies. It will also assist parents and carers to understand how early life events continue to impact on both emotional and behavioural development, and it will also assist to acknowledge issues of separation and loss. Since September 2020, we have completed over 18 life story books and later life letters, and there are currently 78 life story books and later life letters in progress. Early signs are very positive around the impact of the work this is having, not only for the child or young person, but also their carers. COVID and working in lockdown has caused some difficulties, but it cannot take away the enthusiasm the workers have had to support the children and young people requiring this work. An example I'd like to share is a primary school age child who came into care due to chronic neglect within their early life. The child is now placed with adoptive parents. The life storybook and later life letter will not only allow the child to understand why they live with their new family, but also allow them to talk to their adoptive parent without shame or blame. The adopter has stated that they were extremely pleased with the quality and detail of the book and later life letter, and it will give them confidence in their ability to answer questions now and in the future. Allowing them to support the child as they have. Sorry, I'll start again on that one. I lost my page. The adopter has stated they are extremely pleased with the quality and detail of the book and later life letter, and it will give them confidence in their ability to answer questions now and in the future, allowing them to support the child as they too have a full understanding of the child's past. Another example of working with a young person, the Life Story Coordinator established what they would like to understand and gain from having their narrative told. It was very apparent that the young person had conflicting stories of their early years. They were able to explore within the children and families records everyone's viewpoint, parent, carers, teachers and social workers, and why decisions were made at that time, giving them an understanding of why their parents' views may differ. The young person gave her views and suggestions for the content of the book and chose colours on based how she wanted the book to look and make her feel. Yellow for bright and positive and pink for fun. I could go on about examples, but one comment from a social worker encapsulates what a huge difference this work and model will have for a child when she read their completed life story book. I love it. It made me smile and cry in equal measures. A model of present, past, present and future. A future of hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. So at that point, Chair, we're happy just to open it up to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you. Okay, members. Thank you. Councillor Mustoe first. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies, my camera isn't working, and I think I can blur it. But you know, I just wanted to say that in these meetings, we occasionally get these presentations from people that are really quite something in terms of just what you're achieving. And I think this one from Alison is just one of those moments. I see you mentioned Carefree in there, and I've seen their video. I was really moved by it. As I quite often are whenever we encounter Carefree. Yeah, it's just such an incredible thing that you're doing there for those young people with those life story books. And yeah, I mean, I just couldn't speak more highly of what you're doing in terms of that. And I hope that whatever feedback you get from this committee today goes back to your people, and it's really good that those people have been employed and this work has been able to roll out during the pandemic. And as I've said before, it's those frontline workers working with vulnerable children and their families and foster homes and everything else that are really providing a positive thing about everything that this council stands for, I think, during these difficult times. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very grateful for that recognition. This is absolutely one of our priorities. We think, it'll take some time for all children in care we're working with to benefit from this, but we do feel we've made an excellent start and we've got some fantastic people doing this work.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Frank.
Thank you. And I heartily agree with James. It was a really powerful, very heartwarming presentation. So thank you so much, Alison, and please pass on our thanks to all the Life Story coordinators too. Just a quick question. So the Life Story coordinators, is that a fixed term post? We have 3 currently.
They're permanent.
They're permanent. Excellent. Good. So I was that was the answer I was hoping to hear. I was worried that you were going to say, no, we've done lots of children, we won't do any more. So good, excellent. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Good question, Hilary. Thank you. And an uplifting answer. Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? Okay, I'll nip in while people are thinking. I don't know. First of all, congratulations on the work that you've done, not to focus on those 3 and the huge progress that you've made in what is really quite a short time. So thank you. I mean, to triple the number of houses is quite amazing. And I can remember saying when I first saw the report, shall we demand that housing come to the committee? And I spoke to Ben yesterday at pre-agenda meeting, and he was saying that there's been no need for that, that housing have absolutely been on board and totally collaborative in their work towards it. So it's really good news. Thank you. Right, I had about 3 things I wanted to mention. One was on page 57, again in the life story work, and the last sentence, it says, although it will take time for all relevant children in care to benefit from the new arrangements. And I just wondered what all relevant children meant. That sort of implies that not all children would benefit from this. So I just wondered if you could, that's the first thing, could you explain that, please?
Yes, so we believe all children in care benefit from this approach. We just had to initially set priorities about where to start, in brief, and that's been a combination of, as Alison explained, the reason we're, in a sense, for going forward, we've put in place an arrangement where new care proceedings, children coming into care for the first time, that's in place from the off. We've got a bit of catching up to do with some of the older young people who may have been in care for some time, but would also benefit from direct work. And it's probably that area, kind of, if you like, reconnecting with some of our existing children in care, which will take a little longer for us to work through.
Okay, thank you for that. That's good. So it is beneficial for all children. That's lovely to know. Thank you. I've got a couple of other things, but Councillor Rand wants to come in. Julian, you go next.
Thank you very much. Again, sorry to keep coming back on this, but thank you, Ben. What a warming, what a fantastic presentation. What good things that we hear. And you know, as I was saying earlier in this committee meeting, my concern is about levels of funding and therefore the impact on sustaining these high standards that we've achieved. And I noticed under 8 your risk implications, and particularly item 8.3, where you're highlighting the increased pressures on staffing, and you know, they're working beyond their ordinary times. They're making enormous sacrifices to maintain a safe and effective. You know, these are wonderful things, and I hope you pass on our committee's sincere total thanks to all their efforts. My worry is whether they can sustain this going forward if we don't have the resource. That's the worry. It would be an absolute tragedy if we did so much to get you and your team and Jack and everyone else, you know, all the work that was done to get to this point, if that's just to go in reverse. You know, that's our big concern. You know, I just hope I'm around to carry on supporting you. That's all I would help say. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Julian. We hope you are too.
I think it, you know, the report, I think, demonstrates that we have a very strong record of effectively managing demand, and in brief, our approach is really based on helping more families at an earlier stage and more effectively, so that there is less demand subsequently on higher cost and more intensive specialist services. We've maintained that through the pandemic, that's enabled us to maintain our performance so far, but that is increasingly challenging. We were very grateful with the confirmation of the council budget recently, that there is what we see as a fair allocation of resource for the council's children's social care services. And although I don't want to understate the challenges of continuing to deliver such high performing services within the resources available, we think there's a fair allocation, and it gives us a fighting chance of maintaining this and building on this progress. We will do everything we can to reduce the risk of a significant overspend over the coming year. In the longer term, of course, it will be a balance between making our services more effective, but also keeping pace with wider factors which are leading to increased demand, and clearly the impact of the pandemic on the life of the most vulnerable families in Cornwall is likely to be a factor in that, and we need to monitor carefully over the next year or so and beyond what that means for our families and the kind of questions they ask of us as a result.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Sawnby next, and also there's a hand up on the +18 one, so I don't know who's that. Oh, it's gone now. Oh, it's gone. Okay. David, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't normally say a lot on this committee, but what Alison, her presentation really got me emotionally. You know, it's a great thing to do for the young child to have that story when they're young, and maybe when they grow up, they can look back on that and see what a great job that this council has done. Yeah, it really got me that. Thank you, Alison. But that's really all I want to say. I think it's fantastic. They've got a record of their young life in a way, you know, and I think it's brilliant. Thanks very much for that.
Oh, thank you, Dave, for your that positive comment. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to add anything? I'll just say my last. I was interested to see. I mean, there's so much good stuff in this report. I mean, there's so many bullet points, Ben, and it's all so positive that the work that your teams are doing under the pressures of the pandemic as well, and tracking children. So there's two things actually. One is the work that the functional family therapy is having with both with the children on the edge of care, so profitable that we've now we're working with younger children, and I think it would be true to say that's been so well received nationally, really, the work that we're doing. And it says that the last sentence says an independent evaluation of the teams is underway. I'd like to predict what they'll say and that it'll be positive, but it's still good to have, and I think if that's all right with the committee, we'll add that to the legacy as well, so that when that's been done, you can bring that back to committee, please, because that work is well, just unbelievably good, and hence the numbers, you know, because we know that the number of the number of assessments, the number of inquiries, the cases are all up, and yet the number of children going into care doesn't match that. Thank goodness. We're managing to work in a way that prevents that. So congratulations on that, and look forward to hearing about it. And one last thing, again, I think that whoever would be the next councillors on this committee, that they have to bear in mind is 8.3, and it's down as a key priority, and that's about the increased pressures on staff. We have to remember the year and the way that they've had to work and the conditions they've had to work with, added to the increasing numbers, means that we do, as a council and as a committee, need to be certain that keeping an eye on that is a key priority, because we can't do it without them. You know, this is a totally people-orientated directorate. It's all about people. So I'm really pleased to see that in there, and it behoves us as members to ensure that goes through. Thank you for that. Just congratulations, and very, very well done. I'm glad we asked for it to come back so that we can see the fantastic work that's going on. Councillor Thomas.
Yes, very briefly. Thank you, Ben. Just about the life story work, does this also include a box or so of materials or that mark out a young person's life? Because I have talked to some families, some foster families, and they say this has changed over time, and the importance of actually having a nice box is important. There are no budget issues here, are there?
No. So I'll start us off, and Alison may wish to rejoin us and comment, but yes, certainly, Councillor Thomas, there's a variety of ways we try and keep children connected with their past. And you can imagine, you know, we all too easily take it for granted, don't we, when you know, when I don't know, when children or grandchildren are growing up at home, how we keep photos, how we might keep their first shoes, the tag from the hospital, and we strongly encourage, for example, foster carers to retain that and pass that on. Alison, do you want to comment?
certainly there's a variety of ways we can do it, and sometimes it is a box, but they will always have a published book of their life story narrative with pictures and information in that, and it's printed out on publisher, so it does look like a proper book, and a later life letter also will go alongside that, which is usually written for around age 10, so that a fuller understanding of their narrative is in that. So yes, there is a variety of things that you can do, and sometimes a box does go alongside the book with all those things that Ben has just said, with a it could be a little vest, the first bonnet, or the first toy, and things like that go inside.
But certainly there's no on a practical basis, resourcing that is not an issue. The key issue is strengthening, as with the appointment of the workers, having the skilled staff able and available to support this activity.
Yes, if I may say, the experienced foster carers felt that having a box of those items was very important, and they are a very experienced foster carer family.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Right, I can't see any other crosses, and I can't see any hands up. So we can, yes, Councillor Rand has put a message in, really fabulous. It is indeed. OK, so we'll go to Debbie with the recommendations. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation is printed on page 54 of your agenda, and it reads that the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee acknowledges the progress of the Ofsted inspection of local authority schools services action plan and the achievements of the Council's Children's Social Care Services in maintaining an effective service through the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2, that the committee receives a further report on progress on the ILAC action plan in autumn 2021.
So Councillor Mustoe has proposed. I'm happy to second. As my last committee, it'd be nice to get in there and have the privilege of seconding such as Julian quoted, really fabulous work. OK, so over to the roll call.
Thank you, Chairman. So again, the roll call is for, against or abstain. Councillor Atherfold.
For.
Councillor Burden.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
Absolutely for.
Councillor Gammon. Councillor Gammon.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Massey.
For.
Councillor Mustoe.
For.
Councillor Rand.
Absolutely for.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Sawnby.
Emotionally for.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders.
For.
Councillor Mike Thomas.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimously agreed by the committee.
And thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Ben and Alison, and to all your teams. Thank you. OK. So the next item is agenda item 10, and that's the issue that was passed back to us from council. So that's around free school meals and child poverty during the pandemic, and it's a response to the council motion, and it starts on page 70. Thank you. And I believe it's Sharon, or is it Matt who's going to present?
It's both of us, Pat. Right. I'll start, okay. And then Matt will takeover. Can I just say as an opener, this report is the first report. It's an initial report to address some areas of the motion that went to full council, and we are endeavouring to provide as much detail at the moment within the timescales that were possible. Matt is going to do the update on the Healthy Start question, and there's also a future report going to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and that's going to its excuse me, to its April meeting, and that looks further at poverty, food insecurity and financial precarity during the COVID-19 situation. So this report doesn't seek to cover all of that motion, okay, just for clarity.
Okay.
Okay, so this particularly we focused on is the provision of free school meals during COVID. So during the Christmas holiday period, the February half term, and also the Easter holiday period coming up. Could I just draw committee's attention, please, in terms of recommendation number 3, there has been a change now in terms of the funding available for the Easter holidays, in that we've had an enhancement of the COVID winter grant. So the COVID winter grant will now be used to fund the Easter holiday free school meals. I don't know if Matt or Meredith would want to come in and provide more detail, but it's still happening, but there's a different funding pot. So I don't know if that recommendation may need to be amended to reflect same. Okay, so I think members are aware is that the free school meals service sits within Together for Families currently, and that we undertake that eligibility checking service using the Department for Work and Pensions and the HMRC information. And we offer the service. Part of it is a statutory function for our maintained schools, and also academies purchase that service for us to do that bulk checking for them. And every school in Cornwall uses our free school meals service. So we do get a good consistency, of information, advice and response that goes out to parents and families. One of the questions I know was asked in the motion is about whether or not there is data taken up nationally in terms of the take-up rates for free school meals, and it's not published national data, but what we do know from looking at the LATE information that we have, so that's that local authority interactive tool referred to as the LATE. That is available for publicly for people to have a look at. You can look at that at any time and compare information around local authorities, statistical neighbours, Southwest, for example. So when you look at Cornwall's take-up, we actually are doing very well, and we're above both our statistical neighbours and our Southwest authority averages. What we have seen is, following the introduction of the Universal Infant Free School Meals initiative in 2014, that there was a dip in take-up because it removed the incentive for families to apply, because all families were eligible to receive. But what that meant was that there was then a dip in terms of schools being able to secure that additional funding, that pupil premium funding that schools get to support vulnerable children. So what we've done to respond, so when we went back, when we were in first lockdown in March last year, if I can show you 2.8, there were 11,500 children claiming free school meals in Cornwall, and by January of this year it had increased up to 14,000. And although it's not in the report, we have seen a further increase, although not as significant, from January up until now. So what we were able to do is, utilising firstly the summer food fund that came out from government last year, was to make sure that all eligible families were able to access the summer holiday food fund, and also then, as I said, went on into October and December. And that support was at that time was a voucher, a £15 voucher per week per child for every eligible child. What we also did is we asked schools to make us aware of families who were not necessarily entitled to free school meals. They'd just missed the cut-off point, for example, but that schools were reporting to us that they knew the families were really having some difficult times, and we were able to make a direct award to those families. And there were about 100 children supported at that time. So then, as you know, we received the COVID winter grant, and we've utilised that to support, and Matt can talk a bit more about other initiatives as well, but we've used a significant element of that to provide free school meals for families through the Christmas holiday period, through the February half-term period, and as I said, through the forthcoming Easter period. And that grant is one of other a number of grants that the council has received in order to support us through the pandemic. So to date, £650,000 worth of that 1.8 million grant has been used to support the free school meals, and then at 2.16 you can see other areas that have also been able to supported, and there are a number of services across the council that are involved in that. As I mentioned at the start, there's further work underway to look at what food insecurity means for families, and also the impacts of COVID as we go forward, in terms of, you know, the financial challenges that families will be facing and the continued poverty and insecurity that families are facing. And I think with the work that's ongoing, we will start to understand more and more about those impacts. What is really important is to say that the feedback from schools and from families in terms of the flexibility of the approach that we were able to give around the FSM scheme, both in terms of vouchers and that direct support for families who have just missed the cut-off potentially, has been, you know, really valued by schools. Yeah, I would imagine, although East is not here yet, we will be asking schools as well about whether there are families that maybe have missed off the cut-off point in terms of being eligible for that funding. And it's really important that we listen to schools because they know their families, you know, the most. So work continues with the free school meals team. Education services are also part of that, the group that the council has around utilisation of the COVID winter grant, and looking at other ways that that money can be spent. And I know Matt is leading on that, so if you're happy, Matt, if I could hand over to you now, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. So yeah, very brief update just on the Healthy Start vouchers. They are still, we do still see a low uptake. Just for a quick summary, the Healthy Start vouchers provides either £6.20 per week of vouchers if you have a child under 1 year, and if they're between 1 and 5 years, then it's £3.10 a week, and they can be used to provide milk, fresh fruit or veg, frozen or tinned fresh fruit veg. We currently have a 53% uptake on those vouchers, which we obviously would like to see increase, because that puts that cash first approach into parents' pockets so they can go out and purchase those. And also there's the vitamin element of those, which we do still see a low uptake on. So we're continuing to do the promotion work around those to make sure that everybody that's entitled for those Healthy Start vouchers can apply online through the national system and be able to receive those. The COVID winter grant scheme that Sharon mentioned, we can confirm, yes, we had the uplift, which will cover the free school meals for Easter. The deadline has also been extended for that until the 16th of April, and where we can continue to make sure that that cash flow solution goes out for families that are either on low income or experiencing financial hardship due to the coronavirus pandemic. I think that's probably all I can give on the Healthy Start voucher at the moment, and happy to open up for questions. I know there were a few there, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Wills popped in a moment while you were speaking, Sharon, but it was the wrong meeting. I think it's because there's a G7 member briefing on at 1 o'clock, so I wouldn't be surprised to find a few more errant visitors. Right, so thank you both very much for that. I didn't have much to ask. I was going to mention the vitamin scheme, but there's still a poor take up for that then?
Yeah, probably a lot lower than the actual Healthy Start itself. So for January, where we've got the 53% uptake, there's only 128 boxes of the vitamins issued through the 100 or so pharmacies that we've got. as outlets. So it's a mixed thing. We obviously need to work on that promotion of the benefit of those vitamins for pregnant women and for children, but also just make sure that the eligibility is there and people can access them.
Yes, thank you. I've got Councillor Olivier and Councillor Elliott wanting to speak. With respect, Cornelius, I'll go to the committee first and then come over to you. Okay, Councillor Elliott first.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. Obviously, with the voucher scheme, most schools in the country use the Eden Red system rather than one over the various lockdowns. And I know there were issues for a lot of parents accessing. I think Eden Red, of the 900,000 emails they sent out during the first lockdown, 40,000 parents' emails bounced because schools had the wrong information. So are we sure that everybody who was eligible got the information? Do we know any from schools, whether actually statistically or anecdotally, the take up of the vouchers by the parents? So they were emailed, but did they actually go and cash them in and use them for that food? And were schools or the LA proactive in trying to chase families that weren't accessing those vouchers? And the only other thing was, one of the questions, which I don't know if Cornelius might mention in his bit in a second, one of the bits was how effective are free school meals at solving food poverty in families, which was one of the bits in the council motion. So simply, as we discussed yesterday, it's if you provide food in a school or via a voucher, does it impact on the family's food poverty situation, and how can we best ensure that we reduce child food poverty, realizing that it takes cash and needs doing and it needs proper funding. And good to hear about the uplift.
Thank you, Simon. Who's going to pick that up? Matt or Sharon?
I saw Kate's hand up, Pat.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Kate. Thank you,
Kate.
Kate.
To pick up the first bit, but it might be Matt and Meredith that need to pick up the sort of the wider conversation about food poverty. Just in terms, there's no backtrack as to who's cashed their vouchers in, so that information isn't provided back to either schools or the local authority. So I'm afraid, Councillor Elliott, we don't know which families used them and which families didn't. I can make an inquiry to find out whether Eden Red have that information, but I suspect they wouldn't share it with us anyway because of the fact that it would be personal data to that family as to whether they'd used it. But I'm happy to make some investigations, and I'll respond to you by email and copy the chair in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to begin to answer the question about free school meals and child poverty. I think that free school meals is one strand of an approach to eradicate child poverty. It is not the only answer. The COVID winter grant has, which is the area that we're focusing on and making sure that the money is used wisely and is going out to families and to people in hardship, is also a leverage that we're using to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach to how we support people who are in hardship, particularly where there are children and young people as part of that family. And that'll be our longer term process once we've got over the COVID winter grant, to make sure that we are bringing together all the different elements, and indeed going further than what is within the council gift, and making sure that we're having the right conversations with DWP, for example, who are also a key player in reducing economic hardship and for us child poverty as well. So I see it as something which continues to come back to scrutiny at key points over the next 18 months, and I certainly would hope that we can eradicate child poverty in 18 months, but it might take longer, so it might be over the period of the next administration as well.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkin.
Yeah, I wouldn't make any grand claims about the eradication of child poverty, but what I would say is that absolutely, I think Meredith talked there about the holistic part of things. So this particularly is focusing on food insecurity and food poverty, but it is part of a wider piece. And I was thinking about the work on money matters and helping families understand how to manage money and how to manage debt, which is part of that picture there in terms of the support that's offered to try and move people out of those food insecurities. Thank you for letting me come in, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Do you want to come back, Councillor Elliott, or not? Councillor Elliott or not?
It's only to say that the background to the question is a supportive one, in that I know the impact firsthand of whether it's a voucher or a box of food to the families, and it's how we can, through this committee, encourage and give ammunition, if you like, to the argument to a sort of a more permanent 52-week solution to this.
Okay, thank you. Meredith, your hand is still up. Do you want to speak?
Just clarify, I think it will take longer than 18 months to eradicate child poverty, because it has been in place for so long. So I realise that my words probably set a hard target for us to achieve, but there is the commitment to absolutely do to do a huge amount.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Olivier. I've got Councillor Burden and Councillor Atherfold next. Councillor Burden.
Yes, I think Meredith touched on what our big concern is in our area with our experiences. There seems to be terrible duplication. What my wife's worried about is how are the people that actually need it getting to know about the availability. In Launceston, we've got Love Your Neighbour, which is a fair share. That's DEFRA money, 16 million, to bring lorry loads, Arctic loads of food down from Bristol every week, and that's being distributed. And the people who do Love Your Neighbour in Launceston, they do about nearly 100 families, people, and they've got surplus. They've got too much. You don't know what to do with it all. And then, of course, you've got Tesco's and Lidl's, I know, who put boxes out 10:15 or 9:15 or whatever every evening of packs of food if you've got somebody you know needs it, so you can go in and pick it up and deliver it yourself. And I know that the Memory Cafe and people like that do it. And then you've got the Trussell Trust, and then you've got the Salvation Army, who give out food on Saturdays. So all these people are giving out food, but we're a bit suspicious that some people are making a meal of it, as it were, and others have no access to it. And Meredith, you did touch on all these different organisations, and I think since Marcus Rashford said what he said, it's almost like gone over the top. And what we're concerned about is, you know, you just wonder. I mean, Lidl's last week had boxes and boxes, you know, substantial boxes of eggs, and anybody could go in and pick them up and give them away. So there is this, like, all of a sudden too much food, but is it still getting to the right people?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hawkin. You've been speaking, Neil. Why have you been speaking? Sally has put up a link to a food map. Do you want very briefly, Sally, just to explain to the committee what that is, please, as briefly as you like?
Yeah, just very briefly, and I know we're not supposed to put things in the sidebar, so apology for that. It's a way of mapping who's working in the food insecurity territory, so it's something that's used for all councillors to promote to their communities so that people can see what's available there. It's not a perfect system. If you think of something that should be on the map, please get in touch and we can make sure it's put on the map. Lovely,
thank you for that. That was superbly brief. Thank you very much. So thank you, Councillor Burden. So next, oh, Debbie's just said she'll share that link. Thank you, Debbie. So next I've got Councillor Atherfold, please.
Yeah, it's perhaps part of a wider discussion that I've been having with myself, really, and maybe there isn't an answer in this committee, but at what point, if parents cannot feed their children over a prolonged period of time, at what point does Cornwall Council step in and say, look, we're going to take over here because this is a clear evidence of neglect, be it willful or otherwise? I'm not entirely sure, but it's a question I've been wrestling with for a while, and I just wonder what the thoughts of the committee were.
Right, so he's not asking the officers. Does anybody else want to respond to Councillor Atherfeld?
I'm happy to do so during my bit, if you like, Chair.
Okay, well, by all means respond to Councillor Atherfeld now, if you would like, Councillor Olivier, and then we'll have your main bit afterwards, yeah? But on that particular issue of neglect, willful or not.
I think we have to sort of distinguish between neglect and simply being poor, not having enough money. I think it's always important to keep that distinction in mind. And the main reason for food poverty is not the only reason, is that people haven't got enough money. So I'd keep it as simple as that, as you want to be brief, Chair.
Thank you. Sally, you had your hand up?
Sorry, struggling to unmute there. I think I would have said exactly what Cornelius just said. It's quite clear to me, and I've probably said it on a loop several times over, that there's a difference between those who find themselves in a position where they need to go to a food bank because there's a significant food insecurity issue, and those who are grindingly poor day in, day out, which is why I think the £20 uplift should have been a permanent solution rather than something that we're just going to limp on for another 6 months and then have the cliff edge just move further back. So this is something where national government should address the fact that that there's just not sufficient money to keep people operating as a family in a good way.
Thank you. Do you want to come back, Councillor Atherfeld, or not?
No, it's just something I've been wrestling with since the beginning of this pandemic, and I'm just wondering, it seems to be rolling into a long-term problem we've identified, and we're looking at a long-term solution, and I'm just wondering at what point. But you know, thank you for that. It's been useful for me to add to my own argument.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burden.
Perhaps I ought to go back to the officers, really. Who coordinates all this? Because we've got duplication in Nansen, big time. And it may be that it's not getting around Cornwall where it should be, but I mean, some of the superstores are like dishing it out big time. And I know that's better than putting it in the bin at the back of the premises for the vagrants to dip their hands into. But you know, the churches are all gone for fair share and love your neighbour, but they're duplicating what you're doing with the vouchers, and I just think it's becoming like over provision in some areas. I'm not saying, but on the other hand, you know, what we found with the more homeless area of people is they don't know how to even get a voucher. So somebody needs to coordinate it and bring it all together. That's what I'm trying to say, and I just want to know who is doing that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Burden. I'm going to go to Matt, who has had his hand up. Matt.
Hi there, thank you. So there's two answers to the coordination aspect, really. The first is, since the start of the pandemic, we've had a really significant increase in the number of community organisations that have either started to provide food or have changed their operation to providing food. And as part of the Voluntary Sector Forum Thematic Alliance, they have the Cornwall Food Access Alliance, which is a strategic organisation that are supporting all of those organisations to come together. They've been supporting the Food Security Group, which is an internal group of council officers that are working across to help coordinate that provision, which stemmed from the grant that came in from DEFRA for the emergency food and essentials. And so between us and the Cornwall Food Access Alliance, we're expanding the group. We've got a remit now from the leadership teams to be able to expand the work we're doing and bring together all of those organisations to create a food strategy for Cornwall. And what that will be an update on some of the work that's happened in previous years, but it will be a community-led piece that starts to address the wider issues of food security, food access and food justice. across the whole part, and through those organisations coming together, that will help with the coordination. I think particularly the response we've seen can be separated into two aspects around the surplus food, which is one aspect of food security, and also then the actual emergency food provision for people that are in crisis. And they're quite distinct. So there's a significant amount of work going on within that space at the moment. And we would certainly offer, as part of the food security group, to bring updates back to this committee to be able to complete the picture and to be able to update on where we're going over the next 12 and 18 months.
Yeah. Can I just say, Madam Chairman, that would be very helpful, because I think everybody, you've got that wave of support and saying, gosh, we must do something. And on the other hand, the people who do love your neighbour and aunts and say, we're getting so much food, we don't know what to do with it. And I just think that the two things need to come together. And you know, the big question is, are some people still missing out?
Okay, thank you for that. And again, we've just Matt's then given us another legacy issue. He's saying in the next 12, 18 months. So that's another thing for the committee to look at. Councillor Hawken.
Thank you. So Matt's talked about that big picture bit across Cornwall and the food insecurity conversations that are happening at that end, and has always been throughout all our work with different community groups really good at making links between people. If we know that there's two organisations bidding in one area, it's worth saying to each of them, do you know about the other, and encouraging that conversation. But I think there's probably going to be more that needs to be done on a very local level. I know that Hilary can talk about the fact that she's got that kind of food alliance across Saltash organisations, and the same here in Liscard. So we've collected them together and said, what ways can we share and share knowledge and information and make sure we're not duplicating massively, and make sure we are covering need, all those things Councillor Burden just suggested. I would think that there's a model there with those proactive towns to pass that on to other towns to say, this is what we've done, this is what works, and it complements and builds on the work that Matt's talking about for the whole of Cornwall. In all of that, the big question will be the smaller places, all the sort of hinterland of the towns and how they are covered. And obviously there will be the big thing that we've always got, which is around the transport from, you know, getting stuff from Lanston to the surrounding villages, etc. So that's always going to be the challenge to look at. So focusing particularly on rural areas and the work on food poverty, I think would be a really useful thing for committee to look at in the future.
I know somebody uses his camper van to collect this stuff from DEFRA, which he meets the lorry at St Pewter or somewhere in Plymouth. But and then I missed the point I was going to say. Oh yes, the frightening thing for me is kettle food, and has anybody done any research of how many are reliant on kettle food? Because I do think that is scary, you know. And should we then be dishing out mini ovens or microwaves rather than making people just rely on kettle food?
Okay, I don't know if
anybody done the research in that?
Do you want to pick that up, Matt or Sharon, please?
Not that I'm aware, but I don't know whether Matt might have more info from public health perspective.
I mean, the winter COVID grant is permissible, isn't it, to buy things like that, like ovens and equipment for those in need? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, the winter grant scheme can cover fuel and home energy costs, as well as food and anything related to it. So even if it's just cooking equipment, so that is covered within the winter grant scheme. There's been quite a few projects that have worked over Cornwall in this space that have provided slow cookers and have had funding to do that work as well. And of course, all of this goes in hand with the food education as well, about actually how to cook if those skills haven't been passed down through the family and those are not existent for that person. So it's certainly a wide piece in terms of actual evidence of how those things work. The main evidence is around the cash first approaches and making sure that poverty issue is addressed, and ensuring that people can heat their homes and be able to afford the food and the equipment required to cook it as well. So,
could then I'll shut up then, Madam Chairman. But could those people distributing food be made very aware that there is a small grant for people without an oven, a small oven or a microwave, because a lot of the food they have, how could they cook the carrots if they're relying on kettle food? You know, it's just pot noodle and baked beans, isn't it? And I mean, I just think that we've got to move them away from that expensive, actually, food to more practical and healthy living. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm now then going to come to Councillor Olivier. Thank you very much for your patience, Councillor Olivier. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do realise that non-members come back of the queue. That's okay. I was going to start. I hope you'll allow me a bit of a latitude to answer some of the points or respond to some of the points that have come up in the course of this. I was going to.
My generosity is known, Cornelius.
Well, I was going to congratulate you on the politeness and decorum with which this meeting has conducted, which I have to say is a contrast to some other committee meetings I take part in.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Look, the point of concern I had, and it's possible that Sharon answered this in her preamble to this item, a preamble to her report, is, you know, in November the council expressed a collective opinion that it would like to see eligibility for free school meals expanded. You know, get rid of the income cap, and that also essentially, if you're a household with dependent children that's in receipt of universal credit, the free school meal entitlement should go with that. That was the collective opinion of the council. Now, what we asked for in the motion was an assessment, a quantification of what impact that would have, as in, you know, how many children would benefit from changing the qualifications for free school meals. So the only thing that concerned me about the report that I've, you know, I think it's a good report. I think it's an interesting report. I think it's a useful report, but it doesn't contain that information that was requested. There's a few other, you know, it's in point 3 of the motion, which I emailed to members shortly before the meeting started. But there were a series of requests for information, which in this report haven't been met. So I wanted to know when or how that information was going to be collected and made available to members. That was my primary concern. A few other things have come up. Healthy Start vouchers. I don't think people are particularly aware of their existence in the way they are of free school meals. So yes, you know, an awareness raising issue needs to, you know, be engaged in for that. Another point that's come up, I don't know how recently it was announced, but that the COVID winter grant was being supplemented to cover free school meals in Easter. Now, I put forward a budget amendment, as the portfolio holder will be aware, saying that some money should be found from the councillor allowances non-rise to replace the fund that was giving money to food poverty organisations in this financial year. Instead of it was DEFRA funded. There's not actually, as I understand it, something in place to replace the work that DEFRA fund was carrying out. Now, I withdrew that budget amendment because it was put to me that the money from the councillor allowances, unexpected windfall, if you can call it that, was going into Easter free school meals. Now we've heard that that money is coming from government. So I want to ask the portfolio holder, what about this proposal for a food poverty fund supporting food poverty organisations in Cornwall? Right, so, you know, the position has changed since I put forward and withdrew my amendment. And the other point, I've been told, visiting food poverty organisations in Penzance yesterday, that Fair Share is stopping in 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, perhaps this is something you've already covered, but I was really surprised to hear that and unclear what was going to happen instead. And just coming back to Councillor Atherfold, you know, this is not an attempt to pick on Councillor Atherfold in particular or the Conservative Party in general. I worked for the DWP in a job centre before I became a councillor. The safety net that was there for emergencies, for advance payments, you know, for when people have transitions in their circumstances, is no longer there. And a great part of the demand on food poverty organisations is just because there are these big gaps in the safety net nowadays. Right, sorry, I hope I haven't taken up too much of the committee's time, but the primary question was, what about the information that was requested in the motion but hasn't appeared in this particular report? Okay, Chair, that's my lot for the moment.
Thank you for that, Councillor Olivier. You actually asked that one of your questions be directed to Sally. So I'll come to Sally and then we'll go to Sharon. And just to alert you to the fact that Gareth, who is our accountant for Together for Families, has said that we were emailed by the DWP about the COVID winter grant extension on the 2nd of March.
Okay.
So it's fairly recent. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it probably was. I thought it was. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Gareth. Okay, Sally first and then Sharon.
Yeah, so I think that that update from Gareth partly covers it. So what I said to you at the time was true, Cornelius, but
I know.
The situation has changed again. I mean, it's welcome that the winter COVID grant has extended. We hadn't got any prior warning that was going to happen. Pragmatically, the decision has been made to use some of that winter COVID grant to cover Easter, although it has to be said it's not a given that the winter COVID grant does cover free school meals, and in some areas of the country it won't do, but that is what we will be doing here. Because this is new information, the finance are assessing the situation, because yes, there was a motion, there was a budget proposition that included the council allowances money going towards Easter. So by backfilling that with the extended winter COVID grant, it does leave that question. So I have suggested that I think that it'd be useful for that money to be rolled on to future holidays. We know that in part the holidays and holiday activities and food programme won't meet all free school meal needs. So and we know that all the systems have not picked up half terms before, so it's something that is being decided, and we will make sure that we update you and the committee and all interested parties when finance have reached a judgment about that shuffling around of different pots because of late changes, rather than me telling you an untruth, basically.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. If I could very briefly respond in the style of Neil Burden, I'm not talking about where he talks, but the way he comes back. But I did rate, I had a meeting last Friday with Tracy Langley and Adam Painter about this specific issue of a fund to support food poverty organisations in the way the DEFRA grant did last year. So I hope that can be part of the discussions about what you're doing now this COVID grant extension has happened. That's all I wanted to say. Yeah. Sally. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm aware of that, and also some good suggestions around the work that we were talking about earlier in terms of money matters and that debt advice. So absolutely, we will try and make sure that any funds go towards hardship in some form or another.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Lisa Harvey. You might want to introduce yourself and your role, please. I'm not sure whether Councillor Olivier knows you. Okay, so over to Lisa.
I'm having a look. Right, no. Right, go
Hello,
on.
Lisa Harvey, Service Director for Children's Health and Wellbeing. So part of my portfolio is the universal services of health visitors and school nurses. And just a point that hasn't been raised yet around the use of the COVID winter grant is payments that we're giving to children under 5 to help support them as well. So health visitors are carrying around vouchers which they're able to give immediately and directly to families if they identify family in a kind of current crisis and might need some formula milk or nappies or baby food that's either not available at the food bank or the food bank isn't open for the next few days. So it's not just for school age children, we have got a focus on under 5s as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anybody else want to add anything about Cornelius's comments? Or
Well, there was a specific question as well, Chair, about the information.
do you want to repeat that then, please? Thank you.
Sorry, the bit at the beginning was that if we look at the motion, I actually think it would have been better to circulate it with the papers, to be honest, is that when the council expressed its collective opinion that it wished to see eligibility for free school meals extended, it actually asked from some information to quantify the impact of that and assess the value of it. So, you know, if you look at the actual motion, it does say if all children in households in receipt of universal credit, dependent children, received free school meals, you know, how many more children would that mean? What would that cost? So that was information. I got the impression from what Sharon said at the beginning that this might be coming to another forum or at a later date, but I'd really like to clarify that now, because I and others do want to see the information from the motion. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if either Sharon or Meredith want to pick that up.
I wasn't sure if Meredith. There are other reports going to the Health and Wellbeing Board that focus more specifically on the food poverty side of things as well. But in terms of actually the numbers of children in school at the moment, there are 77,000 children attending schools at the moment. From that was last year's number, from 5 to 16. So if it was available for all, that would be the number of children you're looking at. In terms of the numbers, if the benefit cap was removed, I don't know whether our colleagues in the Revs and Bens team would have that. We don't have that information in Together for Families, so whether it's something that could be found and go into the next report that goes to the Health and Wellbeing, I'd need to talk to my colleagues in those services and liaise with Matt so we can seek to find that information, Councillor Olivier. In terms of the Healthy Start vouchers as well, what I wanted to say is that they are also promoted through practitioners that work with families, so through the health visitors, midwives, and you know, sort of early help colleagues. And there is the website. There is a special area on the Healthy Start vouchers website for practitioners about how they can promote that, and also access to the vitamins as well. I know that was raised, so I don't know if that might be useful to put that link in with the minutes, and I'll send that over to Debbie. Yes, so you could see that. And then, yeah, those were the 2 points I was able to answer.
Well, I think if I could come back very briefly, the fact is, figures about how many households in Cornwall are in receipt of universal credit, you know, are publicly accessible, you know, they're broadcast all the time. It is therefore, you know, speaking as somebody who worked for the DWP, it isn't difficult for them, I don't know about, I can't speak for beneficiaries, to quantify how many dependent children are within the 42,000 odd households in Cornwall receiving universal credit. But I think the point was the council took a collective position and they wanted to know what the impact of that decision would be. So as we've asked for the information, I would hope council officers will either give it to us or tell us that it's not accessible, you know, one or the other. The final question that I came to was about fair share. I was a bit surprised to be told that it's stopping. Is this a rumour? Has somebody got something wrong?
Not something I know. Matt has just put his hand up, so hopefully he can answer. Matt?
Yeah, so Fair Share are not stopping their service. A lot of the food that was coming through Fair Share was from the government funding, which was part of, again, another winter grant allocation. That's been spent, so all of the food from that grant has been spent. And so the supply of food that Fair Share have received and that they've been able to purchase will be coming to an end. But they will continue their current service of expanding into Cornwall and providing food.
Right. Well, it sounds like Councillor Burden's concerns about oversupply have been met then, right, at least. But right, and I'm really sorry about this, Pat, and I'm hoping you continue. But from what Sharon said, is that a commitment to actually try and obtain the information specified in the motion?
Sharon?
Yes, what I've written myself a note is to liaise with the Revs and Bens team to find out what information is readily available. And then what I was with Matt's permission, and it'll be Rachel and Meredith's view, they're the signatories on that next report, that we can include something in the report for the Health and Wellbeing Board, so that information is contained within that. People are nodding, so that looks like the right way forward.
Yeah.
Councillor Olivier.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm for the Wellbeing Board, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Debbie I'll bring you in a moment, Councillor Hawkin. Debbie wanted to speak. Debbie?
Thank you, Chairman. It's really to pick up on recommendation 3 that we do have some alternative wording, because obviously there has been an update since the report has been published.
Right. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hawkin, I don't know what HWBB means in the chat box. Should I?
Health and Wellbeing.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So yes. So there's the report.
I thought it was some, teenage speak and that I didn't know. Right. Thank you.
It's not actually a cool acronym. No, sorry.
Right. Okay.
Health and Wellbeing Board, and Cornelius is
Oh, you've gone, Sally. You've muted yourself.
You're muted.
Okay, I didn't touch a thing.
No.
I tell you today, IT has not been great, so sorry about that. Yeah, Cornelius is on the Health and Wellbeing Board, so he will see that conversation there. So I think that the key here is that the council doesn't at the moment hold the information, but we should be able to find it. And I think that, it's DWP information, isn't it? But it's that the key here is the Healthy Start. We are actually able to say, here's the amount of eligible children, here's the amount of children whose families are actually claiming Healthy Start. So DWP give us the information and we hold it in the council for those younger children. So it's being able to extend that and work with the colleagues in the public health team who link across with DWP, so that we've got that Healthy Start under 5's information about who's eligible and who actually takes up. So we're able to benchmark and try and work on closing that gap. We obviously have given some coverage today to all the different routes in which we are trying to increase that Healthy Start voucher take up and the vitamins and all the fruit and vegetables that come through it. I honestly, you'll have heard me say this before, I don't think we can do this enough. I think we just need to keep going on this. I think my observation would be that we used to have a much higher take up. So what we've got is a big additional cohort in this pandemic year, and we could perhaps suppose that they are less used to how to access support and what support might be available, what additional gateways being on universal credit opens, etc. So there's something there about a new group of people who've come to find themselves in the situation and making sure that they are able to access, because as I say, the numbers used to be far higher in terms of that take up of that offer. And I do think it says something about the new cohort of people who find themselves in this position, and it's something that all councillors can help with. Certainly we have the postcode level data of the take up, so I remember in my head that Newquay was somewhere where it was even lower than our Cornwall average. So there's places where we need to focus and help people to access what they're actually entitled to, fruit and veg and support with vitamins, etc.
Okay, thank you, Sally.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, Councillor Livier.
No problem.
Okay, so I'll go to Debbie then with the recommendations, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So the recommendations 1 and 2 are as printed within your agenda on page 70. That the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the contents of the report. That the committee endorses the approach taken by Together for Families to support vulnerable families to access the free school meals provision during the Christmas holiday period and February half term. And the revised recommendation 3, that the committee notes that additional COVID winter grant allocation with an extension to the 16th of April 2021. Part of this allocation will be used to fund free school meals during the Easter holidays 2021. This supersedes the budget proposals approved by full council on 23rd of February 2021, which includes funding for this provision from council core budgets. Thank you, Chairman.
No, okay, thank you very much for that. Could I have a proposer, please? Can't see any crosses or hands up.
I'll propose it, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much.
With an addition that we investigate a better coordination of meal, surplus food distribution in Cornwall, because I think we've got into everybody's wringing their hands, but there is a lot of food out there, and I don't think it's actually getting around quite as well as it should.
Thank you. Do I remember Sharon saying that there was going to be something about that in the report that goes to health and well-being, or have I just made that up?
Well, they cancelled their meeting last time.
Chairman, we can certainly bring that back. As Sharon said initially, there will be further reports, not only to the Health and Wellbeing Board, but also back to the new administration's Children and Families Overgreen Scrutiny Committee, and we will pick that up in future reports if you're happy.
Because I think the council, this is where the council surely should be very proactive in actually making sure that there's good coordination between all those volunteers who are distributing and packing food, and that everybody knows what each other's doing and how they're helping, supporting each other. You know, I mean, somebody was aghast to see the eggs. I'm not talking about cartons of eggs. I'm talking about big boxes of eggs at Lidl's last week, all put on the side. Anybody want them for nothing? Okay. You know, and that's the sort of communication that, you know, everybody's got eggs. Perhaps they ain't got any way to cook them. But what I mean to say is, you know, it seems sad that I think some of the food's gone to waste. That's what concerns me.
Thank you. I know that was your proposal only if that other recommendation was included, or are you happy for that to come at a later date to committee?
Well, I just think that we should be more proactive and say that, and we would like to see a better coordination of food distribution throughout Cornwall amongst the volunteer sector. Really, we need to help them.
Okay, that's a recommendation.
Not just leave them to their own resources.
Okay, thank you. That's a recommendation from Councillor Burton. Is there a seconder for that being a fourth recommendation, please?
I think it's already happening now.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, Councillor Frank.
Yeah, so in Saltash we've done exactly that, Neil. We set up a food alliance. It must be, I don't know, 5 months or so ago, and I'm kind of voluntarily chairing it, if that makes sense, and we're bringing together all the voluntary sector, all the groups, the community fridge, community larder, who are working with food distribution, the food bank, and we've got some great communications going on. I don't think this committee needs to make that as a recommendation. It's already happening in a lot of places. Okay.
I mean, that's brilliant, but we would like to think.
Chairman, could I maybe, Councillor Frank has moved the proposal originally, and I can assure, as always, Councillor Burden, that your points will be firmly addressed within the minutes and taken forward to the Health and Wellbeing Board in their report, and also future reports back to this committee.
Thank you. So can we have a seconder then, please, for the three recommendations and the revised one? If you want a second.
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you. Well, you've proposed.
So
Councillor Elliott is seconding. Thank you.
I thought I proposed, Madam Chair.
Oh, so you did. Sorry.
The Chairman, just for clarity for the live stream, so it's been proposed by Councillor Frank and seconded by Councillor Burden, as I previously read. If I could go to the roll call again, members, it's for, against or abstain. Councillor Atherfold.
For.
Councillor Burden. Councillor Burden. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
For.
Councillor Gammon. Councillor Gammon.
Sorry, I'm on an iPad and it's not easy. For.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Massey. Councillor Massey.
For. Apologies, technical
Thank
issues.
you. Councillor Mustoe.
For.
Councillor Rand.
For.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Sawnby.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
For.
And Councillor Thomas.
For.
Thank you. And those recommendations have been approved, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you to the presenters. Thank you to Matt and to Sharon again. Thank you. So we move to agenda item number 11, which is the update from the Cabinet member, a very comprehensive update that was sent around last night. So is there anything you want to add to that before we go to Cabinet member questions, Councillor Hawken?
So I agree with you actually in your words at the start that it feels quite emotional, doesn't it, to get to this point. Yeah. I couldn't mention everything in the report. I'm trying to mention everything at the all-member briefing on Friday, but that's going to be a trial too, because there's so many good things that you could say.
Fantastic,
you know, always strong on care leavers, but great that despite that, there's always learning and always improving. So I think there's some really good stuff that's come out of that area. Councillor Thomas would be disappointed if I didn't mention local family partnerships. I think that absolute commitment this council has had to place-based work is really positive, and that was part of the One Vision reference group looking at what more we could do to improve on that great start of local family partnerships. The volunteers, the breastfeeding coordinators who were facing an uncertain future, and we took them into the council, so many good things. I think it's absolutely worth recording that young people have been at the heart of everything this committee have done, and you've had them visit you whenever you can, that young people have come to cabinet meetings, they've been at the heart of the climate work the council's done. I've always enjoyed the youth grants panel, which is sort of a whole day when we're reading through and debating applications and young people are mulling over those options and what works for them. I think alongside echoing all the thoughts about the changeover of the senior leadership team in the council, I'd also want to say that we often talk about the front line, and there's a really important line behind the front line. Our business support and our communications and our HR people within Together for Families and who work with Together for Families, they fit under other directorates, but they're a key part of helping make things happen, and the front line couldn't do what they were doing without them. They're part of our QAPM conferences, those people who've heard about that way in which we monitor our performance and talk about what areas we could improve. All of that tracking of progress and that backbone to our learning culture comes from those additional people that support. And they've also more recently been, some of them, matchmaking laptops from the public and with schools who have the offers. So I absolutely feel like it's been a real privilege to work with an outstanding councillor and officer team.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hawken. Thank you, and again, thank you for all the work you've done. Your job has not been enviable, this particularly in this last year. So thank you so much for supporting the children and families of Cornwall. All right, so Tracy and Debbie have alerted me to the fact that the live stream is due to finish at 2, but we can restart after a few minutes. But we'll see how it goes. That still gives us 12 minutes. So they would need 10 minutes, what's Debbie saying, to set up the new link. But members, we would stay on here, would we, Debbie?
Yes, you would, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Atherfeld is hungry. He wants to know about lunch. Okay, and that's perfectly allowable. So shall we see how much we can get through in the next 10 minutes? Okay. So thank you for that. We'll move on to number 10 and number 12, which is questions to Councillor Hawken. With a reminder that not only is he hungry, he's starving, Councillor Atherfeld, okay? All right, Councillor Thomas. If you can keep the questions succinct and the answers succinct, please.
Yeah, I am as well. So it'll be very, and Sally already has the question about this. It's basically, and I have to be reasonably bland in this. I have to be, because there may be people from the sub-licensing group here. So basic question, what is the council's position on burger vans located near educational establishments?
I believe there is an answer being prepared around this that will presumably go your way as well, Councillor Thomas, seeing as you've asked that question. I know we spent considerable time between the public health team and the planning team back a while ago in the administration, looking at what were our powers around what I'm going to call fast food. And hope that we all know what similar things we're thinking about. Actually, they turned out to be more limited than one might hope in terms of bricks and mortar establishments, etc. Largely because some of the famous venues that you might think of when I say the words fast food, actually from a planning point of view come under the category of restaurant, because you can sit in them as well as takeaway, etc. So it's a real challenge how you can get to a place where you are perhaps wanting to offer a planning decision, but based on something to do with a particular type of food offering, because the categories that they use for the different types of establishment aren't helpful to us. We kind of need some sort of health rating. So that's been an ongoing conversation in terms of how far can we push on this. Everybody will be able to think of some of our larger colleges and the collection of places that sell food that we might think as less than ideal for young people seem to be sort of amassed around the entrances to our colleges, and that doesn't feel like a comfortable thing that accords with our sense of what we're trying to promote. So I recognise the challenge in terms of the specifics of the case that you're looking at. I'm sure that the answer is an answer, however limited it might be, will be coming to you shortly.
Thank you very much, and may I take the opportunity of thanking you and thanking Pat for your work over the last 4 years.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it, and it's reciprocated. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Could you please tell me if the children of St Newlyn East Parish will be added on to the new secondary North Coast School, or will they still go to Newquay?
So I don't have that detail, but I can certainly make sure it's sent to you, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. And some lovely thanks in the chat box from Councillor Rand. Thank you. We've loved working with you too. Thank you. Thank you, Julian, for your support and your warmth. Councillor Elliott next.
A fairly quick one. What would you be doing first in May around the 10th if you were sitting back in the same position you are now? What do you think is the one thing, if you like, that is a priority that has to be taken forward bigger than anything else within Together for Families and the work that you do?
That's a really interesting question, and I think that the answer I'd give is actually the same. I sit on two scrutiny committees, attend two scrutiny committees. The other one is health. And my final words to them there was, I think you need to continue to focus on suicide prevention. And I think that whole area around emotional health and well-being is absolutely where we'd want to see our focus. Very, very keen on the fact that everybody in the Together for Families Directorate is careful not to talk about children needing to catch up and some kind of deficit model about what they've missed over the last year. What we need to do is focus on recovery, and I think we've got that focus, and I actually think that schools have got that focus too. But let's not be minimising quite what a challenge that will be to go through that recovery period with young people. So I think that would be the focus of whoever is sitting in this seat after May. Very good question, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon. Okay, there aren't any other crosses in the box, and we've just got a couple of minutes, and then David can eat, along with the rest of us. So I don't have any other business, except to say again, thank you. Thank you for working so well together. Thank you for working as a team. Thank you for what you've done in support of me, and thank you for what you've done in support of the children and families in Cornwall. And a final thank you to the officers and the teams. Thank you. It's it's been great. A little bit sad, but we might meet again for an hour just to look at the legacy items. But in terms of formal meeting, thank you and goodbye. I'm going to formally close the meeting then at 1:55. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll see you again one day, I hope.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, Pat, and thank you, Debbie.